You stand beneath a pale dawn sky over Damascus on a spring morning in the year 715 CE, the air still holding the cool breath of night. The muezzin's call folds over the rooftops like a long ribbon of sound, drifting past domes and minarets still slick with dew. Merchants clatter open their wooden shutters, camels grumble, someone's baking flatbread nearby, the smell earthy and warm. It mixes with dust, horse sweat, and the faint tang of olive oil burning in tiny clay lamps. You're pressed in with a crowd surging toward the great mosque, the newly completed marvel of Umayyad ambition, its marble courtyard shining like a sheet of ice in the early light. Men push past with scrolls tucked under their arms, soldiers adjust their belts with the heavy resignation of people who know they'll be on the road before noon. And a group of boys is already arguing over whose sandal is technically stolen. You're here, in the thick of it, blinking sleep from your eyes, completely aware that you probably won't survive this century-long sprint through the next 1,000 years, but that's fine. Nobody ever survived a crash course in history without at least losing their sanity, so you're doing great. Before we walk forward into the entire Islamic world's 1,000-year arc, remember to tap the like button gently, as if you're touching the delicate stucco of a 10th century mihrab that absolutely should not be disturbed. Post your location and your local time below. Yes, even if it's 3 a.m. and you're wrapped in a blanket like a slightly confused Abbasid scholar on a deadline. And settle in. 2 hours, 1,000 years, one very exhausted you. Now take a breath and slide straight into the unfolding world around you, because the early Islamic foundations shaping everything to come are already under your feet. You move through the courtyard, where the geometric mosaics catch the rising sun and throw it back in fragments of gold and green. The Umayyad world is expanding fast, but its strength rests on earlier foundations formed in the 7th and early 8th centuries, when small desert communities of Arabia were transforming into a network of cities, institutions, and administrative habits that would anchor a civilization. You're watching it from the inside, the slow, steady shift from tribal alliances to structured governance. People speak of the Prophet's lifetime with fresh memory, as if recalling events from their parents' generation. You hear it in the cadence of their conversations, the lived nearness of early revelations, the organisational habits still carrying the raw imprint of communal leadership at Medina. Here, the first essential foundation is unity, not the fluffy philosophical kind, but the practical, absolutely necessary type, where you need bishops, merchants, scholars, tribal leaders, and military commanders to stop yelling long enough to coordinate tax collection. Early Muslim administrations inherited a patchwork of systems from Byzantines and Persians, and while officials debate whether to keep Greek record-keeping or switch to Arabic, you catch a scribe muttering that if the paperwork grows any thicker, he'll defect to the Chinese just to get a break. Bureaucratic humour. Eternal. Arabic is already consolidating as a lingua franca, partly through the spread of Quranic recitation, and partly because soldiers and administrators desperately need to understand one another. You pass a group of students chanting grammar rules, an early form of linguistic glue holding diverse communities together. Someone spills ink, someone else steps on it. A third insists this stain will be historically significant. It won't be, but let them dream. Trade caravans rumble through Damascus's narrow streets, carrying textiles, spices, weapons, and occasionally one extremely confused peacock. Coins pass from hand to hand, stamped with Arabic inscriptions that assert a new political identity. You slip through the crowd, brushed by the edges of a society learning to scale itself, from village leadership to empire-level coordination. Tax systems are being standardized, though the guy next to you whispers that standardized is a bold word for something that changes with each governor. You nod sympathetically. You wander from the mosque toward the administrative quarter, where couriers gallop in and out with messages carrying updates from the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, Persia, and beyond. These messages are freighted not just with news, but with the weight of decisions that will define borders, cities, and dynasties. Some governors push for more autonomy, others push for more money. Remarkably few push for fewer meetings. the expanding world is complex, and early Islamic governance adapts with unusual flexibility, mixing existing local practices with new, central ideals. This blend, not replacement but integration, forms one of the crucial foundations of the centuries to come. You pause near a workshop where artisans carve Quranic inscriptions into stone. The craftsmanship is precise, rhythmic and deeply symbolic. These early visual expressions of faith become another anchor, establishing a shared cultural aesthetic. You glimpse early Kufic script, sharp and angular, marching across marble in deliberate lines. Later centuries will soften these forms, but this moment has the bold clarity of new beginnings. You trace the grooves with your eyes, feeling the weight of meaning even if the chisel dust makes you sneeze. Religious scholars gather in shaded porticos nearby, debating interpretation as earnestly as if the fate of humanity hinges on whether a particular verb should be read metaphorically. They're building intellectual frameworks that will guide future generations in law, ethics, theology, and community life. These debates echo out into everyday routines, how people pray, trade, divorce, lend money, manage water access, inherit property, and settle disputes. Islamic jurisprudence isn't an ivory tower project. It's embedded in the texture of daily life. Someone bumps your shoulder aggressively. A man carrying scrolls about governance reforms proposed for newly incorporated territories. His frustration is obvious, but so is his determination. You see in him the broader momentum, a civilization defining itself not only spiritually but administratively, intellectually and socially. The early communities may have emerged from the Arabian Peninsula, but their future is emphatically global. And you feel the push of that future as you step into a busy marketplace. The noise hits you like a wall, merchants calling out prices, women haggling expertly, a barber yelling that he has new techniques, which is almost certainly a threat. Children weave between stalls. Spices perfume the air, cardamom, sumac, cumin. A storyteller performs under a fig tree, spinning tales of distant battles where empires tipped like cupfuls of sand. He spots you looking and winks, as if to say, "You'll see far stranger things before this journey ends." Fair point. People here aren't thinking in terms of Islamic civilization, indeed, not yet. They're simply living through a period of rapid change, building institutions because life demands them. The foundations forming now: political cohesion, linguistic unity, legal structure, intellectual ambition will guide, stabilize, and sometimes challenge the Islamic world for centuries. But none of that is abstract. You see it in small details: an official noting tax discrepancies on a wax tablet, a teacher drilling students on arithmetic, a caravan schedule written and rewritten because someone misread a date. Civilizations rise on mundane logistics. You pass a group of architects poring over building plans. They discuss load-bearing arches and prayer hall layouts while sipping mint tea. The conversation is half engineering, half poetry, a style that will eventually characterize Islamic architecture across continents. The foundations of this aesthetic are being poured now. Harmony, geometry, repetition, and the deliberate shaping of space to evoke beauty and order. In a world expanding so quickly, these built environments provide coherence. A gust of wind lifts dust into your face. You turn toward the city gates where new arrivals step into Damascus for the first time. Some come to trade, some to study, some to seek patronage, some simply to escape a rival cousin. The Islamic world is already a magnet for mobility, ideas, and ambition. Its early foundations rest on openness, the willingness to absorb and reorganize the knowledge, systems, and people inherited from earlier empires. As you leave the morning bustle, the city seems to breathe with you, expanding, contracting, adjusting. You're walking through the young skeleton of a civilization destined for astonishing range. The world ahead will see golden ages, political fragmentation, scientific revolutions, maritime networks, artistic transformations, and enough palace dramas to fuel several lifetimes of questionable soap operas. But here, in these early years, the groundwork settles quietly into place. Belief, administration, language, law, learning, and the everyday choices of millions. And as the sun climbs fully above the city, throwing long shadows across the marble courtyard behind you, you feel the momentum pulling you forward. The next centuries are already forming, and you're moving with them, whether ready or not. You push farther along the road leaving Damascus, following the worn tracks of caravans and marching columns. The city's noise fades behind you, thinning into the open air of the Syrian frontier, and you feel the shift immediately. The world around you is bigger, wider, almost impatient. The Umayyad expansion is in full force, and you're stepping straight into its momentum. No gentle warm-up, no soft introductory offer. Just the largest territorial surge the Mediterranean has seen in centuries, wrapped in dust, strategy, and the occasional administrative meltdown. The Umayyads don't expand because they wake up one morning and think, let's build something majestic for the tourists. They expand because the early Islamic state has a restless energy, a combination of military mobility, political opportunity, and the vacuum left by two exhausted giants, Byzantium and Persia, who just finished slapping each other into mutual burnout. You walk beside a line of mounted soldiers moving north, their leather cuirasses creaking, their spears angled like a small forest swaying with each hoofbeat. They aren't fantasizing about empire, they're checking water skins, arguing about supplies, and making sure someone remembered the bread. Reality is always logistics. Ahead lies the Mediterranean wind, crisp and salty. The Umayyads push west into Byzantine territory by testing garrisons, probing weak points, and then moving fast. Almost too fast for the administrators trailing behind with stretched out eyes and deeply underpaid scribes. You overhear two officials debating whether the newest conquered settlement should follow Armenian, Greek, or newly standardized Arabic fiscal procedures. They settle the dispute the traditional way. Each blames the other. You keep walking. Crossing into Palestine, you see how expansion isn't just a matter of planting banners. It's a matter of absorbing complex populations. Christian villages, Jewish communities, Arab tribes, Aramaic-speaking farmers, Greek-speaking bureaucrats. They all exist here before the Umayyads arrive, and all continue afterwards. Instead of sweeping away local structures, the new rulers fold them in like ingredients in a massive imperial stew. You witness a tax collector negotiating with a local priest, while a Muslim commander watches the exchange with an expression that says he would rather be fighting 5 battles than filling one ledger. Still, you sense something remarkable. The Umayyads aren't building a world from scratch. They're adapting, reusing, and redirecting what exists. The expansion patterns rely on speed and flexibility. The light cavalry can move across deserts quickly, and the commanders know how to fight without needing endless supply trains. You watch a training session in a dry valley where archers fire from horseback, their arrows slicing through hot air with unsettling accuracy. Someone tells you these techniques developed long before Islam, deep in Arabian tribal warfare, now scaled up to the demands of empire. Scale is the secret ingredient of Umayyad growth, though nobody here says it out loud. They're too busy doing it. You move west with the soldiers toward Egypt, where the Nile glitters like a long silver serpent beneath the sun. The fields are green, impossibly green, fed by an irrigation rhythm older than any empire. Here, the Umayyads focus less on dramatic conquest and more on quietly absorbing a wealthy, populous province already structured by centuries of Roman administration. You watch as Arabic slowly enters the bureaucratic bloodstream. Clerks begin translating documents, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes enthusiastically. One man jokes that switching languages is like switching spouses, exciting at first, confusing after, and requiring endless negotiation. You pretend not to laugh. Cairo doesn't exist yet. Instead, you see Fustat, a growing garrison town standing on the cusp of becoming a major metropolis. Its wooden houses cluster tight, its mosques hum with recitation, and the markets sell linens so fine they shimmer like liquid. Soldiers mingle with artisans, scribes, and merchants. The rhythm is faster here, more commercial. Expansion doesn't just redraw boundaries, it redirects trade routes, pulling wealth along new channels. But the Umayyads don't linger. You follow another group heading across North Africa, moving through endless stretches of terrain that seems determined to test your patience and your hydration. Caravan bells jingle like distant wind chimes. At night, the desert sky opens so wide it feels like you could fall upward into it. Commanders sit around small fires mapping out the next push westward, debating alliances with Berber tribes. Realpolitik reigns. Negotiations, pledges, marriages, incentives. You watch a treaty ceremony where both sides swear loyalty while eyeing each other with the cautious optimism of business partners signing a contract neither fully trusts. Expansion requires diplomacy just as much as swords. Reaching the Atlantic coast later, the wind hits you with cool force, carrying the smell of salt and wild waves. This is where the Umayyad frontier flexes. They've reached the western edge of the known world. You stand beside warriors staring at the ocean, their expressions a mix of pride and confusion. Someone mutters, "There's no more land this way," as if personally offended by geography. Another swears the water tastes different here, saltier, maybe angrier. You decide not to test the theory. The expansion doesn't stop, it bends north instead. Crossing the Strait of Gibraltar is a logistical headache you get to witness firsthand. Ships clatter in the harbour, horses neigh anxiously as handlers coax them onto boats, and sailors attempt to look competent while absolutely not guaranteeing anyone's safety. The crossing is rough, but you make it, disoriented, slightly damp, and immediately confronted by new landscapes. The rolling hills of the Iberian Peninsula. In Al-Andalus, the Umayyads move with both speed and calculation. Visigothic politics are fractured, local elites divided, and the new arrivals slot themselves into existing tensions with unnerving efficiency. You see commanders establishing garrisons, governors negotiating tax arrangements with local nobles, and Arabic beginning its slow spread into official life. Again you notice the pattern. Conquest isn't the end. It's the beginning of administration. And administration requires patience, paperwork, and the ability to drink bitter tea while arguing about land surveys. Meanwhile, the expansion pushes east with equal force. You cross back towards Syria, then into Iraq, where the old Sasanian heartland stretches out in fertile plains. Cities like Kufa, Basra, and Wasit pulse with military and commercial life. Armies move along the Euphrates and Tigris, riverbanks humming with activity. The Persian influence here remains strong, in cuisine, in architecture, in courtly manners, and the Umayyads adapt to it the way a traveller adapts to a new climate, gradually, inevitably. Beyond Iraq lies Persia, and then Central Asia, where the terrain shifts dramatically, mountains rising like jagged teeth, rivers rushing through deep valleys, and fortified towns clinging to trade routes like barnacles. You accompany a caravan weaving through this region, its camels laden with goods from China, India, and the steppe. Expansion here isn't a clean sweep. It's a series of negotiations, battles, treaties, and renegotiations. You meet local rulers who switch allegiance depending on who looks stronger this season. Military campaigns mix with diplomacy, marriage alliances, and occasionally sheer exhaustion. The Umayyads push through the Oxus region, where steppe riders test their mettle against the new arrivals. You watch skirmishes that explode suddenly and end just as quickly, both sides manoeuvring with the precision of people who know every inch of landscape. The commanders you travel with refine tactics constantly, learning how to counter fast-mounted archers and how to secure supply lines in hostile terrain. Someone quips that conquering mountains should come with hazard pay. Throughout all these regions, you observe a consistent pattern. Expansion doesn't create uniformity. It creates networks. People remain who they are, but now under a new layer of political oversight. The mosaic grows larger, more intricate. The Umayyads lay roads, repair aqueducts, secure ports, appoint governors, and send letters so frequently you start suspecting that couriering is the real backbone of empire. Every arrival of a dust-covered messenger shifts the local mood, hope, fear, irritation, or, on one memorable occasion, despair when people learn a new tax rate is coming. And yet, for all this, the expansion remains surprisingly adaptable. Local customs survive, languages persist, Economies continue with modified rhythms. In one village you see Arab soldiers eating Persian dishes while speaking a mix of Arabic and local dialects. In another, Greek-speaking administrators teach new recruits how to manage tax rolls. The Umayyad state stretches across continents, but it rests on an intricate web of relationships, negotiations, and adjustments. Nothing about it is monolithic. You return finally to Syria, watching the sun set over the desert, painting the sand in deep gold. Behind you lies a sweep of territory from the Atlantic to Central Asia, an empire grown through speed, strategy, and pragmatism. Ahead lie centuries of change, conflict, learning, and reinvention. But right now you feel the pulse of the expansion still humming under your feet, a momentum that will shape the next chapters of your journey across the Islamic world. You feel the world tilt beneath your feet as you leave the frontiers of the Umayyads and walk toward a new centre of gravity rising beside the Tigris. Armies, administrators, scholars, merchants, everyone seems to be drifting in the same direction, pulled by the quiet but irresistible force of political transition. The Umayyads have stretched themselves thin, and now, from the currents of discontent and ambition, a new dynasty steps forward, the Abbasids. You arrive in Iraq just as the air thickens with whispers of revolution, alliances, and the kind of bureaucratic panic that suggests someone misfiled a major prophecy. When Baghdad appears on the horizon, it's still fresh enough that the plaster hasn't entirely dried in some neighbourhoods. The round city gleams like a copper coin in the sun, wrapped in walls that curve so perfectly you suspect someone got scolded every time the line wavered even a hair. This planned capital is the visible expression of a deeper shift. Governance is changing from fast-moving frontier administration to a more layered, cosmopolitan and institutional system. The moment you step through the gates, you can feel the bureaucracy multiplying like very determined rabbits. Inside, everything moves differently. You don't see the rugged improvisation of the early Umayyad garrison towns. Instead, you see structured ministries, specialised departments, record rooms filled with scrolls, and corridors bustling with officials carrying tablets, waxboards, reed pens, and expressions that say, "I have not slept in 3 days." The Abbasids are building a government that hums like a machine, not always smoothly, but loudly, insistently, and with enthusiastic use of paperwork. You wander into the Diwan al-Kharaj, the tax bureau, where clerks sit in long rows copying land assessments and irrigation records. Water rights along the Tigris and Euphrates are a bureaucratic obsession here, and you accidentally overhear a heated argument over a canal's precise length. One man claims it's 2 parasangs, another swears by 3, a third, more realistic fellow simply says, "It's long enough to ruin my weekend either way." That's governance in action. Territorial management shaped by agriculture, infrastructure, and people who know that a mismeasured canal can spark more trouble than an invading army. You move deeper into the administrative core. Arabic is now fully entrenched as the language of power, but Abbasid governance doesn't erase the older Persian and Greek influences, it blends them. Secretaries trained in Sasanian tradition handle correspondence with elegant precision, while mathematicians draft fiscal tables inspired by Persian models. The Abbasids don't reinvent the wheel, they upgrade it, polish it, and add a department dedicated solely to counting its spokes. Everywhere you look, you see layers of expertise, judges trained in Islamic law, diplomats versed in court etiquette, engineers designing canals and dikes, and caravan masters coordinating shipments from as far as India. Baghdad becomes a magnet for talent, but also for people who pretend to have talent, such as the man currently insisting he can predict flood levels by staring meaningfully at river foam. No one believes him, but a few stop to watch anyway. Bureaucracy is stressful. Foam divination is entertainment. The Abbasid shift isn't just institutional, it's symbolic. The round city's geometric precision reflects a deliberate statement: order, control, rationality. Standing in the central courtyard, you watch officials deliver reports to the caliph's palace at the city's heart. The caliph seated behind carved screens. receives these summaries like a conductor receiving notes from different sections of an orchestra. Ideally, everything harmonises. Realistically, half the musicians are late, one is drunk, and someone swapped the sheet music with a grocery list. But the intention is there. Walking through Baghdad streets, you notice something else. The Abbasid world is urban. Truly urban. Markets teem with silk, spices, glassware, ceramics, manuscripts, perfumes, tools, dyes, and sometimes objects you genuinely cannot identify. Workshops clang and clatter. Artisans shape brass lamps, weave carpets, polish jewels. The energy in Baghdad isn't frontier adrenaline, it's metropolitan sophistication, and occasionally metropolitan arrogance. One shopkeeper tells you his raisins come from the finest vineyards outside Ray, and when you shrug, he adds, "Obviously you don't understand elite raisins." Governance shifts with urban growth. The need for order leads to police forces, night patrols, building inspectors, sanitation workers, and professional judges overseeing disputes. You pass a Qadi's court packed with people arguing over everything from property boundaries to missing chickens. The judge listens carefully, consults legal principles, and renders his decision. The chicken thief is scolded, fined, and told he should apologise not only to the owner but to the chicken. You nod solemnly. Justice must be thorough. The Abbasid court itself is an entire universe. Ceremonies become more elaborate, influenced by Persian imperial customs. You glimpse courtiers wearing fine robes embroidered with geometric motifs, each garment broadcasting rank. Servants flit between corridors carrying trays of sweet pastries and fruit. Scholars recite poetry to waiting officials. Envoys from distant lands wait nervously for audiences, clutching letters, gifts, or desperate pleas for help. One envoy fidgets with a carved ivory box as if hoping it will whisper diplomatic advice. Behind these displays lies an intricate network of power brokers, wazirs advising the caliph, generals commanding frontier forces, secretaries maintaining correspondence, and governors overseeing provinces from North Africa to Khorasan. You attend a meeting between the wazir and several regional administrators, where the atmosphere ranges from respectful to carefully contained panic. The wazir asks about provincial tax revenues. The administrators present charts so complicated you suspect even the mathematicians are confused. Numbers swirl, accusations hover, and at one point someone discreetly offers tea to prevent a meltdown. Yet the Abbasids aren't only concerned with revenue. Administrative reforms extend into social realms, welfare programs for widows and orphans, endowments for schools and hospitals, and regulations on marketplaces to ensure fair trade. In Baghdad you visit a Bimaristan, a hospital, where physicians keep detailed patient records and treat everything from fevers to broken bones with a mix of Greek, Indian, and local medical knowledge. The building is clean, organised, and shockingly advanced compared to anything in early medieval Europe. You leave feeling both impressed and slightly resentful on behalf of all the unfortunate medieval Europeans still being treated with herbs and hope. The caliphs themselves embody the governance shift. Whereas Umayyad rulers emphasise tribal legitimacy and military strength, Abbasid caliphs project scholarly authority and moral guardianship. They sponsor intellectual debates, libraries, observatories, and translation programs. You once stumble into a discussion between theologians arguing about free will so intensely you're tempted to check whether the room is on fire, but no. That's just what happens when scholars disagree. Still, the Abbasid court has its shadows. Political intrigue thrives. Palace officers compete for influence. Royal siblings plot alliances, and some advisors whisper strategic suggestions that sound suspiciously like veiled threats. You witness a tense standoff when a powerful general demands greater autonomy in his province. The wazir smiles diplomatically, promising to review the matter. The general leaves satisfied. The wazir, as soon as the door shuts, mutters, "We're absolutely not reviewing that." Meanwhile, out in the provinces, governance shifts ripple through daily life. In Egypt, tax reforms adjust irrigation responsibilities. In Syria, judges introduce standardized legal procedures. In Persia, administrative offices incorporate Arabic but retain old Sasanian formats for record keeping. Everywhere, linguistic, cultural and legal blending continues. You watch villagers present a water dispute before an Abbasid-appointed official, who consults both Islamic law and older local customs before issuing a ruling. The merging of systems creates stability, or at least less chaos than you expect. Yet one of the most significant shifts is abstraction. Governance moves from personal relationships to institutional structures. No longer does authority rest mainly on tribal ties or battlefield charisma. It rests on offices, departments and procedures. People obey not because they like the governor, but because the institution he represents, the Diwan system, commands legitimacy. As you walk along a shaded canal in Baghdad, you see scholars collecting data on rainfall, physicians cataloguing illnesses, jurists drafting legal opinions, and engineers calculating irrigation repairs. Governance is becoming analytic, systematic, and intellectually driven. It's imperfect, often chaotic behind the scenes, but it's a leap beyond anything earlier Islamic administrations attempted. And with every step you take through this buzzing, organised, argumentative, hopeful city, you feel the Abbasid shift settling into the bones of the civilization. For centuries to come, rulers, scholars, and common people alike will live with the consequences, good, bad, and occasionally absurd. The night rises over Baghdad, lanterns flickering along the streets, and you sense that the centre of the Islamic world has truly moved here. Politics, culture, law, and identity now orbit this round city like planets around a sun, and you're standing in the luminous middle of it. You drift deeper into Baghdad's maze of streets where the scent of ink, parchment, and warmed lamp oil begins to thicken, guiding you toward the beating heart of one of history's greatest intellectual engines. You've seen armies and administrators, politics and palaces, but now you're stepping into something quieter, stranger, and infinitely more explosive, the knowledge translation networks that will ripple across continents and centuries. You don't know it yet, but the place you're wandering into will one day feed the Renaissance, stir revolutions in science, reshape medicine, challenge philosophies, and at some point inspire a student in 2025 to swear at their algebra homework. The House of Wisdom doesn't look like a mystical library with dragons guarding scrolls. It looks like a sprawling research complex where scholars, translators, astronomers, scribes, and occasionally sleep-deprived interns gather with the intensity of people who forgot to pace themselves. You step inside one of its courtyards where voices overlap in a dozen languages: Arabic, Syriac, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, rising and falling like waves. Birds flutter along the roof beams. A scribe mutters to his inkpot as if negotiating with it. A mathematician argues with an astronomer over whether a certain star is definitely misbehaving. This is not a quiet, reverent temple of knowledge. It's a buzzing intellectual beehive where ideas bump into each other, merge, and occasionally explode. At the centre of the courtyard stands a low table covered in scrolls rescued from older empires. You see Greek philosophical treatises, Persian administrative manuals, Indian mathematical works, and scientific texts that would have vanished from history had someone not decided to drag them halfway across Asia. The Abbasids pay handsomely for knowledge, sometimes literally by the weight of a manuscript in gold, which leads to some translators suspiciously choosing the thickest possible parchment. One man proudly unveils a new translation of Galen that appears to be 40% medical wisdom, 10% commentary, and 50% extremely wide margins. You follow a translation circle where scholars work line by line. First, a reader recites the Greek text in a steady voice. Next, a bilingual scholar renders it into Syriac. Then another translator converts the Syriac into Arabic. Several reviewers hover nearby, offering improvements, corrections, or unsolicited opinions about sentence rhythm. You watch them debate whether a word means humour, fluid, or please stop arguing. The process isn't always smooth, but it's meticulous, collaborative, and shockingly modern. The work isn't just linguistic, it's conceptual. When these translators encounter ideas unfamiliar to Arabic audiences, like complex Greek metaphysics or Indian astronomical cycles, they don't simply copy. They adapt, explain, contextualize. You catch a philosopher rewriting a section of Aristotle while muttering, "If I don't simplify this, the students will riot." The students overhear and loudly agree. Walking deeper into the rooms of the House of Wisdom, you find astronomers bent over instruments, armillary spheres, astrolabes, quadrants. They map the stars not to predict personal fates. No, you'll meet a tall stranger. Nonsense. But to understand planetary motion, calculate prayer times, determine Qibla directions, and improve navigation for merchants. One astronomer proudly shows you a set of tables so detailed they make your eyes water. He explains how scholars across Baghdad exchange data constantly through letters, early peer review, minus the snarky comments. You pass mathematicians revising Indian numerals, the ones you casually use today without realizing your daily math is part of a millennium-old intellectual remix. They refine concepts of zero, decimal notation, algebra, and geometry with the excitement of people discovering that numbers are more cooperative than most humans. A scholar writes the word algebra at the top of his page, unaware that this little term will eventually terrorize students around the world. History is wild. Your path takes you into a chamber filled with medical researchers, copying surgical treatises and compiling pharmacological texts. They consult Greek, Persian, and Indian sources, comparing treatments for fevers, eye infections, fractures, and digestive troubles. A physician demonstrates a new surgical tool that looks far too sharp for comfort. Patients wait in another room, calmly discussing symptoms while you stand there imagining 1,200 years of generational trauma passed down through people who hate going to the doctor. Knowledge here is not limited to the elite. Copies of simplified medical and agricultural manuals circulate widely. You see a caravan master purchasing a handbook on treating camel diseases, and a merchant buying a booklet on accounting that looks suspiciously like the ancestor of modern spreadsheets. The translation movement doesn't just serve scholars, it supports real-life work, trade, farming, engineering, architecture. You move into the geometry wing, yes, that's a thing, where scholars take Euclid's elements and dissect it like a puzzle box. They draw diagrams on wax tablets, then argue about them so enthusiastically that one man accidentally elbows a pot of ink onto the floor. They don't even pause. You notice drawings of arches, load-bearing curves, and experimental calculations that will eventually revolutionize architecture across the empire. Those intricate Makana's ceilings you'll see later. Their math starts right here, on wooden desks sticky with ink and ambition. The translation network spread far beyond Baghdad. You sit with a group of travellers planning journeys to Jundishapur in Persia, to Haran in northern Mesopotamia, and to monasteries in Syria, all centres of Greek learning preserved by Christian and Jewish scholars who kept copying texts during the chaotic post-Roman centuries. The Abbasids rely on these communities, not just tolerate them. You watch a Muslim official thank a Christian monk for providing a rare manuscript. The monk shrugs and says he's just glad someone else finally wants to read it. Collaboration through mild sarcasm, the foundation of civilization. Communication moves in every direction. Caravans carry books across deserts. Sailors ship manuscripts across the Indian Ocean. Letters travel from scholar to scholar, filled with questions, corrections, and polite notes like, "Your theory is interesting, but have you tried being less wrong?" You watch a messenger deliver a packet of astronomical observations from Khorasan, and immediately a cluster of scholars crowd around it like children around a birthday cake. Not all translations receive equal enthusiasm. You meet a translator struggling with a particularly dense passage from Aristotle. After hours of wrestling with metaphysics, he groans and mutters, "Why is this man like this?" You pat him on the shoulder sympathetically. Across the room, another translator beams with pride as she completes a Persian treatise on statecraft, full of advice on governance, espionage, and the strategic use of silence, some of which the Abbasid bureaucracy absolutely intends to weaponize. What shocks you most is the infrastructure behind all this. Wealthy patrons fund translation teams. Merchants donate profits to libraries, Caliphs send agents across continents to collect manuscripts, a kind of intellectual treasure hunting. Paper mills churn out sheets so efficiently that the cost drops dramatically, making books accessible to a much broader audience. You see giant stacks of fresh paper drying in the sun, the sheets fluttering like pale flags of a quiet revolution. The atmosphere is intoxicating. Scholars pace halls muttering formulas, translators compare idioms, scribes sharpen reed pens with the precision of surgeons. Everywhere you turn, someone is writing, calculating, copying, debating. The House of Wisdom is not a building, it's an ecosystem. And the translation movement is not mere preservation, it's transformation. Languages merge, ideas evolve, knowledge migrates. Nothing stays still. You linger by a balcony overlooking Baghdad. Below, the Tigris glitters under the afternoon sun. Boats drift by carrying goods and people from across the empire. The city hums with a sense of purpose, a belief that the world can be understood, measured, improved, explained. You realise that the translation networks aren't just academic, they're civilizational. They tie together Egypt's engineers, Persia's physicians, India's mathematicians, Syria's theologians, and Greece's philosophers into a single intellectual web. This is the moment the Islamic world transforms into a global knowledge engine, absorbing, refining, and redistributing wisdom across continents. You feel the vibration of it under your skin, a sense that ideas here are alive, breeding, cross-pollinating, preparing to leap outward in ways no one can yet imagine. And as you turn away from the balcony, you know this network will keep expanding, carried by caravans, ships, scholars and dreamers, pulling you into the next layer of this vast unfolding world. You step out of the scholarly glow of Baghdad's translation halls and into the open air, where the scent of parchment gives way to roasted chickpeas, wood smoke, and the unmistakable perfume of a bustling urban marketplace. This is where ideas turn into action, where theories become trade, and where the cities of the Islamic world pulse with commercial life so intricate and interconnected that you can practically hear the gears of an economic machine spinning beneath your feet. Today you're not wandering through libraries or lecture room, you're plunging directly into the daily functions of urban commercial systems, the places where merchants, brokers, craftsmen, sailors, bankers, tax officials and hungry shoppers collide in one roaring ecosystem of opportunity. You enter the Baghdad souk just as the morning rush hits. Stalls burst open like flowers, each revealing a small universe. At the spice seller's table, heaps of turmeric, saffron, cinnamon and black pepper glow like small volcanic mountains. The vendor waves a scoop under your nose with the enthusiasm of a man genuinely offended you have not yet purchased anything. Across the lane, a silk merchant unfurls shimmering fabric dyed with indigo, madder root, and crushed pomegranate skins. The colours shift in the light, and you hear a woman gasp, then immediately begin bargaining with the precision of a seasoned negotiator. This is commerce, Baghdad style. Fast, loud, and fueled by caffeine levels no one has scientifically measured yet. Urban economies thrive on specialisation. You weave through the streets and note how each quarter organises itself by trade. The metalworkers' district rings with hammering, smiths shaping pots, blades, tools, and decorative brass lamps with curling patterns. In the carpenters' section, sawdust flies as artisans carve window screens so intricate they look like lace. Leatherworkers soak hides in vats of dye. Tanners scrub skins clean. Sandal makers stitch thick soles for desert travel. These neighbourhoods run on skill, muscle memory, and the occasional argument over who borrowed someone's chisel. But the real magic of urban commerce lies not in the crafts alone, it lies in the systems connecting them. You hover near a group of brokers, called simsar, easily identifiable by their loud voices and the confident swagger of people who can negotiate a shipment of peppercorns, while simultaneously telling you which camel driver is most likely to steal your lunch. They arrange deals between parties who don't trust each other, translating not languages, but interests. Brokers memorize prices across the city. Wheat in the grain market, copper in the metals quarter, Indian cotton in the imported textiles row, and the going rate for slightly dubious medicinal herbs. You follow one such broker through the crowd. He stops at a courtyard where merchants gather with scrolls listing inventories: wool from Yemen, soap from Syria, sugar from Persia, frankincense from Oman. A caravan from Khorasan has just arrived, and the merchants cluster around the crates like scholars around a new manuscript. Papers rustle, seals click open, and suddenly everyone is shouting numbers. In this world, information moves almost as fast as goods. Prices shift hourly. Rumours about grain shipments from Egypt can raise or lower bread costs. One report of bandits on a trade route can change the layout of an entire market day. You glance up at a second-story balcony, where a scribe records transactions on wax tablets and paper sheets. You notice how precisely he notes weights, quantities, and dates. The Islamic world's commercial engine depends heavily on documentation: contracts, receipts, credit notes, partnership agreements. You watch one merchant sign a Sirad contract, an investment system in which one partner provides capital and the other conducts trade. Then both share profits. It's capitalism without banks breathing down your neck, and it works astonishingly well. The man pockets the contract with an air of triumph and immediately runs off, hopefully toward profit, not disaster. Credit lines stretch across the entire city. A cloth merchant hands a letter to a banker scribbling behind a lattice screen. The banker records the loan, adjusts his accounts, and passes a small slip of paper back. It's a promissory note, redeemable at partnered shops. The merchant doesn't touch a single coin. Welcome to early financial technology, simple, elegant, and less suspicious than modern credit scores. You leave the SUQ briefly to wander toward the riverfront. Here, longboats crowd the docks, their hulls bulging with goods: Indian spices, East African ivory, Egyptian grain, Persian carpets, Chinese porcelain. Stevedores clamber over ropes like acrobats. Sailors shout greetings. The docks smell like tar, wet rope, dried fish, and ambition. Harbour masters keep detailed registers of incoming and outgoing shipments, while tax inspectors discreetly confirm that nobody is forgetting to declare an entire crate of pearls. You watch a ship unload pottery wrapped in straw. A merchant inspects each porcelain bowl with a jeweller's lens, clicking his tongue at imperfections. Another vessel arrives carrying indigo from India, its sailors exhausted from battling monsoon winds. A tax officer boards to assess duties, scribbling notes while the captain politely and futilely tries to lower the fees with flattery. Not all commerce happens in daylight. At nightfall you follow lamplight into the khans, caravanserais designed for foreign merchants. These fortified inns contain courtyards, storage rooms, sleeping quarters, animal stalls, kitchens, and security staff forbidding anyone from poking around crates they shouldn't. You meet traders from China, India, Zanzibar, Sicily, Turkic lands, and the steppe. They sit on woven mats around steaming dishes of stew, sharing stories about shipwrecks, sandstorms, cheating middlemen, and bureaucrats who file paperwork like they're paid per sheet of paper. Which, honestly, might be true. The conversations sparkle with commercial intelligence. A Chinese merchant warns others that the price of raw silk is rising. An Indian trader explains how monsoon timing affects pepper shipments. A Persian broker announces that Syrian glassmakers have invented a new technique for making clearer panes. News spreads through whispered deals, gossip, letters, and coded gestures. You're witnessing globalization, 9th century edition. Moving back into the city centre, you step into the money changers district. Brass scales glitter under sunlight. Coins clink in rapid rhythms. Abbasid dinars of pure gold, silver dirhams, Byzantine solidi, Persian drachmas, Central Asian copper coins. Money changers calculate exchange rates with astonishing speed, occasionally pausing to glare at counterfeits. One man shows you a coin he bit earlier. He claims testing gold with your teeth is reliable science. You politely refrain from tasting currency yourself. Urban commercial life isn't just about trade, it's about regulation. You walk past a mutasib, a market inspector, who checks weights, measures, food quality, and business ethics. He scolds a butcher for trimming too much fat, compliments a baker on his loaf's consistency, and confiscates a jar of spoiled pickles from a vendor whose expression suggests he was planning to pass them off as extra-aged delicacies. Rules matter. Standards matter. Without them, the commercial machine sputters. As the afternoon heat softens, you wander into a bathhouse, not for relaxation, but because bathhouses are social hubs where merchants gossip freely. Men recline on warm stone, discussing prices of Yemeni incense, whether Egyptian linen is overrated, and the rumour that a new road in Persia has cut travel time by 3 days. You soak in the overheard information like a sponge, and also sweat, because the steam room is aggressive. By evening, you find yourself walking through residential quarters where shop fronts close and homes open. Women sit outside embroidering cloth for sale. Children run through alleys carrying trays of pastries their families bake in bulk for morning markets. Old men count coins by lantern light, sorting earnings from the day's transactions. The urban economy doesn't sleep. It only shifts shape after dusk. You climb a rooftop for air and perspective. The city spreads beneath you. Markets, docks, workshops, warehouses, alleys, bathhouses, taverns, caravanserais, all pulsing with movement. Lamps flicker like stars in a constellation of commerce. You can feel the entire system humming, coordinated, adaptive, resilient. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Fustat, Basra, Aleppo, Nishapur, Bukhara, Fez, and Cordoba echo with the same rhythms, forming a network of urban hubs connected through land and sea. And you realise something important. The commercial systems don't just sustain the empire's wealth, they shape culture, architecture, social class, neighbourhood layouts, daily routines, and even the food people eat. They determine where canals are dug, where marketplaces grow, where mosques rise, and where roads twist through the city like arteries. Commerce is infrastructure. Commerce is identity. Commerce is the quiet engine driving everything else. As the moon rises over Baghdad, casting a silver glow along the Tigris, you feel the weight of countless transactions, bargains, partnerships, and negotiations drifting through the night air. Commerce is life here. Lively, loud, complicated, and endlessly creative. And as you leave the rooftop, you step back into the river of the city's heartbeat, pulled forward into the next layer of the Islamic world waiting beyond. You slip away from the nighttime buzz of Baghdad's markets and walk toward the city's outer fields, where dawn is stretching itself awake across irrigation canals, date palms, and fields glowing with dew. This is a different kind of engine, quieter, older, more patient, but every bit as powerful as the bazaars you just left. Urban life depends on rural innovation, and the Islamic world's agricultural and industrial revolutions ripple outward from farms, mills, workshops, and riverbanks in ways that transform entire continents. Today you're about to trudge through muddy fields, peek into noisy factories, startle livestock, and probably get yelled at least one very tired farmer. As the sun rises, the landscape reveals a tapestry of cultivation: wheat, barley, rice, sugarcane, cotton, flax, melons, and vegetables unfamiliar to your modern palate. New crops introduced through long-distance trade: sorghum from Africa, citrus from China, bananas from Southeast Asia, spread like quiet ambassadors of a globalizing world. Farmers compare seeds from India with irrigation tools from Persia and fertilizers perfected in Iraq. One man proudly shows you his new lemon tree like he's presenting a newborn child. Another scoffs and claims lemons are a fad. You keep walking before a produce-based argument escalates. The real miracle here is water. The Tigris and Euphrates feed a spider web of canals, aqueducts, ditches, sluices, and wells. Early morning light glints off the surface as teams of workers adjust wooden gates, diverting water with the precision of engineers conducting a watery orchestra. You watch a massive noria, a water wheel, turning steadily, lifting buckets that pour into channels running toward thirsty fields. The wooden creaking becomes a kind of heartbeat. Farmers listen to it the way sailors listen to waves. In one field, you see a sakya, a Persian-originated water-lifting device powered by an ox trudging in circles, turning a gear system that raises water in a continuous stream. The ox looks like it regrets all life decisions, but the machine works beautifully. The farmer offers you a chance to guide the ox. You decline politely, mostly because the ox glares at you with clear suspicion. Agricultural manuals circulate widely in the empire. You watch a farmer flip through a treatise on soil quality that includes diagrams of root systems and recommendations for compost mixtures. Another farmer reads about optimal pruning techniques for date palms. You realise you're witnessing a kind of agricultural science. Not improvisation, but informed experimentation grounded in shared, written knowledge. You pass a field where workers apply fertiliser mixed from animal manure, ash, and sometimes even decomposed plant waste. One particularly cheerful farmer insists you smell it. You decline because even historical immersion has limits. Crop rotation is everywhere. Wheat one year, legumes the next, vegetables after that. This reduces soil exhaustion and boosts yield. You overhear two farmers gossiping about a neighbour who skipped rotations and whose crops now look limp enough to audition for a tragic play. The moral: even in the 9th century, everyone judges bad farming choices. You walk toward a cluster of mills where grain arrives in steady caravans. Water-powered mills grind flour endlessly, their rhythmic grinding echoing across the valley. A miller invites you inside, beams proudly at the giant turning stones, then immediately reprimands an apprentice for letting grain spill into the channel. The miller's scolding echoes off the walls, accompanied by the steady clatter of wooden gears that make the building feel alive. If agriculture forms one pillar of production, industry forms the other. You venture into the industrial quarter, loud, smoky, busy. This is the part no schoolbook shows you. Islamic cities had industrial zones long before modern factories cluttered skylines. The first workshop you enter is a paper mill. Huge vats of pulped fibres churn under muscular arms stirring them with wooden paddles. Sheets of wet paper are pressed, flattened and dried on racks that turn the courtyard into a forest of fluttering leaves. Paper is cheaper than parchment and easier to produce than silk scrolls. This innovation ignites the spread of books, bureaucracy and letters, essentially the medieval version of inventing affordable Wi-Fi. One worker hands you a freshly pressed sheet. It's soft, delicate, still damp, and smells faintly of warm linen. You resist the urge to keep it as a souvenir because he's watching you like a hawk. Next, you step into a textile workshop. Rows of weavers sit at wooden looms, their hands moving so fast the threads blur. The sound, clack, slide, thump, becomes a mechanical rhythm guiding the workday. Silk threads from China, cotton from India, wool from Arabia, and linen from Egypt merge into fabrics embroidered with gold thread or dyed with lapis, saffron, or indigo. A master dyer proudly dips a cloth into a vat of deep blue, lifts it out, and explains how different minerals affect colour fastness. He then casually mentions that apprentices once ruined a batch worth a year's wages. Everyone nods like this is still a sensitive subject. Glassmaking is another marvel. You slip into a furnace room where artisans blow molten glass into flawless spheres that become lamps, bottles, and windows. The furnace heat hits you in a wave that nearly launches you back outside. Artisans shape the glowing globes with metal tools, forming delicate ridges and swirling decorations. One shows you a bowl with an iridescent sheen, a technique that, he brags, even impressed a visitor from Venice. You may or may not be witnessing the roots of future Mediterranean art trends. Metal workshops clang with relentless intensity. Blacksmiths forge tools, knives, locks, surgical instruments, and ornate brass lamps carved with geometric patterns. Sparks fly, hammers ring. A burly man tests the balance of a new blade by swinging it near your face. You flinch. He laughs. You reconsider historical field trips. Pottery workshops smell of clay and wood smoke. Rows of pots, bowls, tiles and jars dry in the sun. Workers paint designs in turquoise and black, using glazes made from minerals ground into powder. A potter explains how different firing temperatures change colour, then pauses to shout at an apprentice who let a kiln overheat. The resulting disaster, he warns, will haunt someone's paycheck. Industrial innovation spreads through manuals, guilds and apprenticeships. Cities specialise: Damascus for steel, Nishapur for pottery, Cairo for glass, Samarkand for paper, Basra for shipbuilding. Regional identities form around these industries, and merchants brag about their local goods the way modern people brag about hometown donuts. Speaking of shipbuilding, you head to Basra next, where the air tastes of salt and sawdust. You find shipyards lining the riverbank. Workers assemble wooden hulls using teak, cedar and date palm wood, hammering planks into curved ribs. Caulkers smear tar and resin into seams. Sailmakers stitch giant triangular sails. Ropes twist from palm fibre. A shipwright explains hull curves with gestures so large and enthusiastic he nearly knocks you off the dock. Ships built here will cross the Indian Ocean, reaching East Africa, India, Sri Lanka and even China. Each vessel carries goods, languages, beliefs and technologies, weaving the Islamic world into the global fabric. You pass workshops where artisans refine sugar from cane, crushing stalks, boiling juice, crystallizing sweet white grains. Sugar spreads like wildfire across cities, transforming food culture. Confectioners use it to create sweets, pastries, syrups, and candied fruit. You try a sticky morsel offered by a smiling vendor. It's delicious. Then he tells you it's his experimental recipe. You worry briefly about your stomach's future. But so far it seems fine. Agricultural and industrial innovations intertwine. Cotton grown in irrigated fields becomes fabric in textile workshops. Sugarcane harvested along riverbanks becomes a luxury ingredient. Timber floated down rivers becomes ship hulls. Everything flows in cycles of production, distribution, and reinvestment. The Islamic world doesn't industrialize in the modern steam-powered sense. Instead, it builds a distributed network of highly skilled labour, advanced tools, water-powered machinery, and specialised centres. It's a decentralised, flexible system that supports cities, armies, scholars, merchants, and everyday people. As you walk back toward Baghdad, the sky turns the colour of cooling steel. Workers finish their tasks, animals settle in stables, furnaces dim, and canals reflect the fading light in long ripples. Behind you, fields continue feeding millions. Ahead of you, workshops continue crafting the goods that move along trade routes in every direction. You realise that the agricultural and industrial innovations of the Islamic world aren't just technical, they're cultural, economic and environmental revolutions woven into daily life. They sustain cities, connect continents, and quietly transform human history. One crop, one tool, one mill, one ship at a time. And as night falls gently across the land, you feel the hum of production slowing, but never stopping, pulling you toward the next rhythm of the world you're exploring. You return from the fields and workshops with dust on your clothes, ink stains on your fingertips, and at least 3 new opinions about irrigation you never asked for. But now you're heading toward a quieter part of the city, not silent exactly, but pulsing with a different kind of energy. This is where ideas are shaped into rules, where disputes become precedents, and where scholars gather in circles so dense they appear to form gravitational fields. Today, you're stepping directly into the world of religious scholarship and law, the living, breathing network of minds that defines how societies operate from the courtyard to the courtroom. The sun is barely stretching over Baghdad when you approach the mosque courtyard of a renowned jurist. Students gather in wide semicircles, some sitting on mats, others kneeling on bare stone. The teacher, just an elderly scholar with eyebrows so formidable they could probably issue fatwas on their own, raises his hand for quiet. His voice slides into the air, steady and rhythmic, reciting principles of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, that will shape everything from marriage contracts to inheritance disputes. You settle in beside a young student scribbling furiously. His reed pen scratches so intensely you wonder if he's carving the law straight into the floor. The scene reflects a broader truth. Islamic law isn't made in courts first. It's shaped here, in study circles, commentary sessions, and heated debates that begin at dawn and sometimes end when the lamps burn out. Scholars compare hadith chains, examine Quranic verses, and apply analogical reasoning, qiyas, to new questions arising from a rapidly changing world. You hear a student ask whether a partnership agreement can be valid if one partner supplies tools instead of cash. The jurist responds by citing a precedent from Medina, adding a commentary from an earlier scholar, and then delivering a verdict that is both precise and unexpectedly funny. Jokes slip into these lessons like tiny bursts of sunlight. Not many, but just enough to keep students from collapsing. You move between circles and begin to see how the major schools of law, madhabs, take shape. Each school, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and later Jafari and others, builds its own methodologies, legal interpretations, and regional identities. In Kufa and Basra, the Hanafis thrive with their emphasis on analytic reasoning and adaptability, making them favourites of bureaucrats who deal with messy, real-world situations. In Medina, the Malikis ground their rulings in the practice of the early Muslim community, clinging to local precedent like a prized family recipe. In Baghdad, Shafi'i ideas circulate, blending textual rigour with systematic reasoning, and Hanbali scholars push for stricter adherence to scripture, occasionally threatening to smack metaphor over the head with the literal meaning of a verse. You step into a smaller study room where a circle of scholars is analysing the authenticity of hadith, transmitted sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. The atmosphere feels like a cross between a detective agency and a genealogical research lab. One man explains a narrator chain with the intensity of someone recounting a family scandal. His uncle was trustworthy, but his cousin's servant once forgot a date shipment, so we can't rely on him for precision. The group nods solemnly, taking these biographical details as seriously as life or death evidence. The meticulousness is incredible. Scholars authenticate narrators based on memory strength, travelling habits, honesty, and who they ate dinner with. You hear one scholar mutter that a certain transmitter is the kind of man who exaggerates about fish size, which immediately puts his reliability in question. Apparently, fish tales have been ruining credibility since the 8th century. Leaving the mosque, you enter the Qadi's court, a legal space where disputes unfold in real time. The Qadi sits on a low platform surrounded by clerks, scribes, and a small mountain of documents that looks like it could collectively recite the law if asked nicely. The first case involves a merchant accusing his caravan partner of mishandling funds. The Qadi listens, strokes his beard thoughtfully, and then asks for witnesses. 2 appear, argue over the price of pepper, and accidentally reveal that neither remembers the exact date of the alleged incident. The Qadi sighs softly, a universal judicial sound, and postpones the hearing. Next, a woman presents a divorce case. She argues her husband neglects her rights and refuses to provide maintenance. The Qadi questions both sides, reviews their marriage contract, and delivers a ruling based on legal principles that ensure fairness within the framework of Islamic law. The woman leaves with a sense of relief. The husband leaves with the unmistakable look of someone who has just been dimensionally reduced by moral reasoning. Then a farmer arrives with a water rights dispute so complicated that even the scribes exchange looks of preemptive despair. The Qadi consults documentation, applies legal doctrine, and references an opinion from a jurist in Kufa about canal maintenance. After 20 minutes of dense reasoning, he issues a verdict involving shared responsibility, seasonal regulation, and a mandatory inspection. Everyone nods. No one understands what happened. That's law for you. You wander out of the courtroom just in time to collide with a young mufti, a legal scholar tasked with issuing non-binding legal opinions, fatwas. He's balancing several scrolls, muttering something about textual variance, and why is everyone obsessed with parchment thickness? He explains that people from all walks of life come to scholars with questions. Can a merchant pre-sell goods he hasn't received yet? Can a farmer lease land for half the harvest? Can a sailor pray while sitting if the boat keeps rocking? Should someone pay zakat on a herd of goats if half of them keep wandering off to join a neighbouring flock? No detail is too small for legal consideration. You follow him into a modest office where he meets petitioners one by one. A shopkeeper wants to verify the fairness of a credit deal he's been offered. A widow seeks guidance on dividing her late husband's estate. A group of potters asks whether forming a cooperative violates any principle. It doesn't. Each case is weighed carefully, grounded in scripture, precedent and practical ethics. You begin to understand why scholars are so respected. They navigate life's complexities with compassion, logic, and a willingness to admit when a question has already been debated for 200 years. As midday approaches, you enter a madrasa, an institution emerging as a structured centre for legal and theological study. Students crowd wooden desks, copying texts, analysing commentary layers, and occasionally dozing off before being whacked awake by a classmate's elbow. The master lecturing at the front explains contract law through vivid hypotheticals, including one involving a neighbour's goat that keeps eating pomegranate blossoms. His students laugh. You don't know whether the humour lies in the goat or the blossoms, but you laugh anyway to blend in. The madrasa model spreads across the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Nishapur, from Damascus to Cairo, from Cordoba to Fez. These institutions formalise legal education, producing generations of qadis, muftis, administrators and teachers. They also feed into public life. Madrasa-educated scholars draft laws, advise governors, mediate disputes, and teach in mosques. The scholarship itself isn't isolated from the real world. You meet a judge who spends mornings in court, afternoons teaching, and evenings answering community questions. His life is a blend of public service and intellectual pursuit. Law isn't abstract, it's lived. Meanwhile, theological discourse shapes the atmosphere. You overhear a discussion between two theologians debating divine attributes. Their conversation spirals into metaphysical nuance until one throws up his hands and declares, "Let us agree that God knows everything except perhaps why you keep interrupting me." Their argument draws a small crowd because theological debates are basically the medieval equivalent of reality TV. Walking through the neighbourhoods around the mosque, you see how religious scholarship affects daily life. Contracts are notarized according to legal standards. Market inspectors base regulations on ethical principles. Husbands and wives negotiate marriage obligations formalized by fiqh. Farmers organize irrigation rights informed by legal precedents. Even children play games based on arguments they overheard from their scholar parents, with shouted lines like, "My analogy is stronger than yours," echoing down alleyways. Religious law isn't rigid, it adapts. Scholars write treatises addressing new technologies, trade networks, social realities, and foreign customs. You find a scholar researching contract disputes in India, another studying maritime law for sailors in Aden, another examining inheritance law among Berber tribes. Their flexibility is astonishing. Even rulers consult scholars. You watch a caliphal advisor approach a jurist seeking guidance on tax regulations. The jurist listens, nods, and then, with the diplomatic grace of someone balancing truth and survival, gently advises the official to perhaps reconsider some of the proposed measures. You sense a backstory involving political headaches. As the afternoon settles into warm golden hues, you sit by the Tigris beside a group of students quizzing each other. They debate legal maxims, recite principles, joke about confusing cases, and pass around dates and fresh bread. Despite the intellectual weight of their work, there's joy here, a camaraderie built on shared pursuit of understanding. You realize something simple yet profound. Religious scholarship in the Islamic world is not merely ritual, it's infrastructure. The legal system stabilizes commerce, family life, agriculture, governance, and community relations. It shapes ethics, institutions, and cultural identity. It creates predictability in an unpredictable world. The sun sets behind Baghdad's skyline, casting long shadows across the mosque domes and minarets. Lamps flicker in courtyards as scholars gather for evening study. The murmur of debate drifts through the streets like a warm, steady tide. And you walk onward, pulled deeper into the world that emerges wherever knowledge meets daily life, toward the next horizon waiting just beyond the scholarly glow. You leave the legal circles behind, still echoing with debates about goats, contracts and cosmic metaphysics, and move toward a quieter district where the streets smell faintly of charcoal, herbs and hot metal. Here the noise changes. Less shouting, more scraping, fewer arguments, more calculations muttered under breath. You're stepping into the scientific and medical world of the Islamic Golden Age, a realm where scholars dissect the cosmos, diagnose diseases, measure shadows, grind minerals, sketch human anatomy, and occasionally nearly set their robes on fire during experiments they swear were perfectly safe. This is where the theoretical becomes practical, where knowledge shifts from parchment to instrument, and where some of history's greatest breakthroughs begin, not with thunderous discovery, but with a scholar blinking groggily at a diagram while sipping strong questionable tea. The sun hasn't fully risen when you arrive at an observatory perched atop a hill outside Baghdad. Its white plaster walls glow pink in the dawn light, and the rooftop is dotted with instruments that look like they were stolen from an alien spacecraft. Astronomers huddle in heavy cloaks, adjusting astrolabes, armillary spheres, sighting tubes, and bronze quadrants large enough to double as defensive shields. Someone yawns so deeply you suspect he hasn't slept since last week. Another scribbles numbers onto parchment with frantic energy. A third mutters curses at Jupiter, accusing the planet of intentionally drifting off its predicted path. You watch two astronomers measure the angle of a star with an astrolabe, a device so elegant and versatile it might as well be medieval multi-purpose software. They teach you how to read altitude, determine time, locate the Qibla, calculate latitude, and solve basic trigonometry problems. You nod politely, fully aware you will forget everything in the next 5 seconds. Inside the observatory, tables overflow with star charts. Scholars compare Greek models, Indian cycles, Persian observations, and new Islamic calculations. One man braggingly shows you a set of corrected planetary tables that improve on Ptolemy. His colleagues clap, then immediately argue about his rounding methods. Collaboration in this world is 50% admiration and 50% friendly sabotage. The air feels charged, not electrically but intellectually, as scholars debate the shape of the universe. Some champion geometric models of celestial spheres, others explore new theories inspired by Indian astronomy. A young student asks whether the Milky Way is a collection of countless tiny stars. The room goes quiet. Then several scholars exchange glances that say, he might actually be right, and rapidly jot notes before pretending they already knew that. You leave the observatory and head toward a medical district where buildings hum with activity. The Bimaristan, a hospital, smells clean, herbal and faintly sweet, like lavender mixed with vinegar. Inside, patients lie on neat beds. Curtains divide wards by illness, not social class. Physicians in white robes move briskly, checking pulses, examining eyes, and referencing thick medical texts. The place feels startlingly modern, calm, orderly, and grounded in systematic care. A physician greets you warmly and ushers you into a lecture hall. Students sit on benches while he demonstrates how to diagnose fevers based on pulse variation. He references Hippocrates and Galen, but also critiques them, adding insights from Persian and Indian sources. He stresses empirical observation. Look at the patient, not just the book. You sense how revolutionary that attitude is in a world where many physicians elsewhere still rely on guesswork and celestial mood swings. He takes you on rounds through the hospital. One ward treats digestive illnesses with herbal mixtures involving mint, anise, and something that smells suspiciously like regret. Another treats surgical patients, bones set with splints, wounds stitched carefully, instruments boiled and bandages fresh. You nearly collide with a surgeon holding a scalpel shaped like a tiny crescent moon. She smiles, explains she's preparing for a cataract operation using a needle technique perfected centuries earlier. You smile back, impressed and terrified. In the pharmacy room, shelves overflow with jars labelled in elegant Arabic calligraphy. Rosemary, myrrh, opium, aloe, saffron, camphor, lavender, henna, rosewater, turmeric. Pharmacists grind powders on marble slabs, mix syrups in copper pots, and paste labels onto jars with maddening neatness. A man offers you a spoonful of a mild tonic. You refuse on principle. He shrugs and drinks it himself, then immediately hiccups violently. You feel validated. Stepping back outside, you follow the scent of burning coal to an alchemy workshop, a laboratory where chemistry is slowly pulling itself out of mystical fog and into experimental science. The scholars here are part chemist, part philosopher, part fire hazard. Glass vessels bubble over braziers, metal rods glow red, distillation rigs drip clear liquid into flasks. A scholar in a soot-stained robe stirs a mixture and mutters, "If this explodes, I was never here." He explains how they refine alcohol, purify acids, test minerals, and distill essential oils. They experiment with dyes, inks, perfumes, and metal alloys. Many alchemists still hunt for philosophical gold, immortality, universal solvents, secret elixirs, but their experiments accidentally produce practical breakthroughs, new methods of distillation, new chemical compounds, better antiseptics, and stronger metalwork. You step into another room where scholars test optical devices. One man holds a polished glass sphere and shows how light bends through it. Another demonstrates how curved mirrors magnify images. They cite Ibn al-Haytham, a pioneer who argues that vision isn't rays shooting out of your eyes like some awkward superhero power, but light entering them from the outside. His experiments involve dark rooms, precision apertures, and carefully measured beams. You watch light travel through a pinhole and project an inverted image onto a screen. It's the ancestor of cameras, and you can almost feel photography humming faintly in the future. Mathematics thrives nearby. You find a group of scholars kneeling around geometric diagrams drawn on wooden boards. They solve algebraic equations using methods so elegant they make modern calculators feel insecure. A man writes algebra at the top of his page, the systematic reduction of equations. Another demonstrates algorithms involving square roots, balances, and unknown variables. You realize algebra isn't invented here. It's refined, formalized, and taught systematically in a way that sticks for the next millennium. Geometry is everywhere. Scholars examine proportions for architectural domes. They calculate the curvature needed for perfect arches. They test distances across the earth using measuring rods, angles, and shadows. In one courtyard, you watch a mathematician measure the height of a minaret using a stick, a shadow, and a smug expression. He explains the calculation to his students, who gasp appropriately at the cleverness. You walk next into a cartography room. Maps spill across tables. The Mediterranean, North Africa, India, the Indian Ocean, the Silk Road, even speculative sketches of lands farther east. Geographers revise coordinates, correct coastlines, and update maps based on merchant reports. One cartographer proudly displays a world map he just completed, pointing to labelled regions with satisfaction, then blushing when a sailor casually mentions a coastline that looks a bit more wiggly in real life. The atmosphere is vibrant, a blend of curiosity, frustration, breakthrough, and good-natured rivalry. Scholars borrow from Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese, and Babylonian knowledge. They critique Aristotle, refine Galen, update Ptolemy, expand Euclid, and mix their own observations with inherited wisdom. Every field pushes against its boundaries, sometimes gently, sometimes with enough force to break something fragile. By late afternoon, you find yourself walking along the Tigris, absorbing everything you've seen: astronomers drawing cosmic maps, doctors setting bones, chemists boiling strange liquids, mathematicians sketching proofs, cartographers adjusting the shapes of continents. This world hums with disciplined experimentation. Knowledge isn't static, it's kinetic. You sit on a low wall as the river glows gold, scholars still hurrying between buildings like ants carrying bright ideas instead of crumbs. You realize something profound. The Islamic world's scientific achievements aren't miraculous accidents. They arise from institutions, funding, cross-cultural exchange, libraries, paper mills, translation networks, observations, and relentless curiosity. This is where science becomes a culture, and culture becomes science. As night settles, lamps flicker on inside hospitals, observatories, and workshops. Experiments continue, stars are measured again, and scholars prepare for another night of studying the universe, and you rise, drawn toward the next unfolding layer of this civilization's brilliance. You leave behind the smoke-stained laboratories, the herb-scented clinics, and the astronomers still arguing with planets, and drift toward a quieter stretch of the city where the streets widen into graceful avenues. Here, the air feels different, lighter, touched with incense, and echoing with faint hammer taps and murmured prayers. You're stepping into the realm of beauty-made stone, the artistic and architectural development of the Islamic world. This is where geometry becomes poetry, where calligraphy dances across walls, where craftsmen turn raw materials into sacred space, and where builders argue passionately about load-bearing arches over breakfast. The first thing you notice is the sound, not the chaotic bustle of markets or the muttering of scholars, but the methodical rhythmic scraping of chisels on stone. You follow it to a shaded courtyard where a group of artisans works on a slab of marble. One man sketches interlacing geometric patterns with charcoal, each line so precise it looks printed. Another chisels carefully, tapping the stone with such delicacy that you fear a single sneeze would ruin everything. A third polishes the carved surface with sand and cloth until it gleams like still water. They're creating a panel that will adorn a new mosque. Nothing grand, just one piece of a much larger artistic ecosystem. But even this tiny fragment flickers with the unmistakable ambition of a world that refuses to decorate anything halfway. You wander toward the mosque they're building. The site hums with controlled chaos, architects pacing with scrolls under their arms, masons lifting bricks, carpenters fitting wooden beams, tile makers stacking glazed squares that shimmer like jewels. The lead architect waves his team into position, ordering adjustments to the dome curvature with the brisk authority of someone who definitely hasn't slept. He spots you watching and, like every proud craftsman in history, immediately drags you over to see the dome's supporting squinches. You pretend to understand. He beams anyway. As you look up, the half-finished dome catches the sunlight. Workers apply plaster, measure angles, and climb scaffolds like gravity is only a suggestion. The dome isn't just an engineering feat. It's a philosophical statement about unity, harmony, and the infinite. Its shape draws the gaze upward, toward a sky that feels suddenly vast and welcoming. Inside, the acoustic properties are carefully planned. A single voice can fill the space without echoes, turning every sermon into surreal poetic chaos. Inside the mosque, calligraphers sit cross-legged under the arches, dipping reed pens into ink made from soot and gum Arabic. They write Quranic verses in flowing scripts, Kufic, angular and authoritative, Nask, soft and legible, Thuluth, dramatic with swooping curves. The calligrapher closest to you murmurs each word as he writes, steady and reverent. His lines glide across the plaster like black silk on white stone. In this world, calligraphy is not merely decoration, it is devotion, artistry, and architectural structure rolled into one. In places where figural imagery is discouraged in sacred spaces, calligraphy and geometry rise to take centre stage. And geometry? Oh, geometry is everywhere. You step into a small side chamber where a mathematician works closely with tile makers, sketching star patterns and interlocking polygons. His eyes blaze with excitement as he shows you how a simple set of rules can create infinite permutations. You watch craftsmen cut glazed tiles into flawless shapes, arranging them into patterns that ripple across floors and walls like frozen music. Colours shimmer, deep cobalt, emerald green, sunlit gold, rich terracotta. Standing back, you feel the patterns pulse gently, as if breathing. A tile maker leans over and whispers proudly, "No gap larger than the width of a date pit." Perfection measured in fruit seeds. That's craftsmanship. You step into the streets again, passing caravanserais, fountains and public baths. Even everyday buildings boast artistic touches, carved wooden doors, lattice screens, painted ceilings. A tired baker sweeping his doorstep has a geometric panel above his door that would be museum-worthy in your own time. Here, beauty is not reserved for palaces. It permeates the landscape like an architectural fragrance. But palaces, yes, those are a world of their own. You arrive at a sprawling complex where governors receive guests. The entrance glitters with marble and mosaic. Guards lead you inside, and the very air shifts. Cooler, scented with rosewater. Courtyards unfold in a series of elegant sequences, fountain to archway, archway to garden, garden to hall. The floor is polished stone that reflects light like a shallow pool. The ceilings are carved wood painted with vines, birds and stars in colours so vibrant they almost hum. You enter a reception hall where musicians rehearse for a banquet. Their melodies echo under a vaulted ceiling. Along the walls, artisans inlaid wooden panels with ivory and ebony, forming patterns so intricate they look woven rather than carved. One craftsman explains the technique. Thin strips of wood and bone glued together, cut at angles, then rearranged to create new designs. You nod appreciatively. He smiles like a man whose life's mission has just been validated by an enthusiastic time traveller. Beyond the hall lies the garden, a vision of paradise made earthly. Water channels divide 4 perfect quadrants, an architectural reflection of the gardens described in scripture. Citrus trees scent the air, flowers bloom in ordered beds, birds flit among pomegranate branches. The sound of trickling fountains fills your ears, cooling your thoughts. A court poet sits by the water, writing verses about the moon, love, or possibly the tax office. It's hard to tell, he refuses to show you the poem. As you wander deeper into Iraq, you notice the architectural styles shifting subtly. In Samarra, tall minarets spiral like coiled ribbons. The great mosque's minaret rises in a monumental corkscrew, making the surrounding landscape look like a carefully designed miniature world. Craftsmen explain how the ramp spirals upward so the muezzin can ascend on horseback. You raise an eyebrow. They nod seriously. Apparently, calling believers to prayer while mounted was the medieval equivalent of stylish multitasking. Further west in Syria, you find mosaics of astonishing beauty. Tiny bits of glass and stone arranged into landscapes, buildings, trees and rivers. The walls shimmer with gold tesserae, catching sunlight in a way that makes everything glow. In Damascus, the Umayyad Mosque still glitters with scenes of gardens and cities, echoing Byzantine influence with a distinctly Islamic sensibility. You sense the cultural layers interwoven like threads in a tapestry. Travelling west into North Africa, the architecture shifts again. Courtyards grow more intimate. Stucco carving becomes finer, lace-like. Arches become horseshoe-shaped, elegant and soft. Zelly tilework blooms across walls in symmetrical gardens of colour. In Kairouan, the great mosque rises with solemn grandeur, thick columns, a square minaret, and vast courtyards shimmering in sunlight. Its simplicity radiates authority. Its details whisper centuries of devotion. Crossing the sea to Al-Andalus, you find architecture willing to dazzle shamelessly. Cordoba's great mosque overwhelms you with endless forest-like rows of red and white arches, columns recycled from Roman ruins, and a prayer hall that stretches into visual infinity. The mihrab glitters with gold mosaic imported from Byzantium. The light is soft, filtered through lattices and lamps. And within this space, geometry, scripture, rhythm and silence weave into something transcendent. You press onward to Granada, where the Alhambra sprawls across a hillside, a palace that feels like a whispered secret. Water trickles through narrow channels, catching sunlight like broken silver. Stucco walls erupt with carved verses, stars, tendrils and symmetrical miracles. Makarnas, stalactite-like ornament, drips from ceilings in delicate clusters that look like frozen honeycomb. You tilt your head upward and lose yourself in a riot of mathematical beauty that feels alive. You realise these artisans didn't just build spaces, they built experiences. Back across the empire, artists thrive in workshops that blur the line between craft and science. Glassmakers experiment with metallic glazes. Metalworkers etch designs into brass ewers. Potters develop lusterware that gleams like iridescent dawn. Painters illustrate manuscripts with detailed landscapes, elegant animals, and delicate botanical drawings. Their pigments come from crushed minerals, saffron, indigo, and even ground-up beetles. They assure you this is normal. Calligraphers become celebrities of refinement. Their work decorates books, buildings, coins, textiles, and ceramics. A master calligrapher in Cairo demonstrates scripts so graceful that you almost forget the blister on your foot from all this wandering. He explains how each letter must balance proportion, flow, and breath, a concept he refers to as the hidden soul of the ink. You nod solemnly, partly moved and partly wondering if your handwriting back home should apologise for existing. Patterns, rhythms, proportions. Everything here has rules, and yet creativity flourishes within those rules, producing variety as vast as the empire itself. The unified aesthetic is not monotonous. It's a shared vocabulary spoken in different dialects. From Persian gardens to Andalusian courtyards, from Ottoman domes to Moroccan zelly, each region adds its accent. What you realise walking through these cities, courtyards, mosques, palaces and workshops is that Islamic art and architecture emerge from a combination of theological principles, mathematical precision, environmental adaptation, and deep cultural conversation. Beauty is functional. Function is beautiful. Devotion becomes design. Engineering becomes ornament. And art becomes a way of structuring the world. As dusk approaches, lamps flicker to life across the city. Light glows behind lattice screens, spills through courtyard arches, and reflects off fountains like scattered stars. Workers pack up their tools. Calligraphers clean their pens. Architects roll up scrolls covered in numbers and lines. The city hums with quiet pride. You pause under an archway decorated with floral arabesques. The patterns swirl above you in an endless loop. Ordered yet free, structured yet imaginative, precise yet filled with motion. And in that moment, you feel the unmistakable heartbeat of a civilization that expresses its soul through form, pattern, and space. Then you step forward, carried into the next unfolding current of history. You slip out from under the cooling shadows of arches and carved stucco, and head toward a part of the city where the roads stretch wider. The air fills with shouts from dock workers, and every breeze smells faintly of salt, tar, sandalwood, and camel sweat. This is where the Islamic world connects itself, not by ideas or scholars or art, but by movement. Caravans, ships, pack animals, monsoon winds, and long-distance trade routes bind 1,000 cities into one humming circulatory system. Today, you're diving straight into the vast, tangled web of trade routes and maritime control, where merchants live like gamblers, sailors treat storms like personal insults, and empires learn that commerce can be as powerful as conquest. You start inland, where the Silk Road unfurls across desert routes like a ribbon drawn by the hand of a restless god. Caravan bells tinkle in rhythmic waves as camels sway under towering loads of silk, musk, porcelain, spices, dyes, and sometimes one very unhappy goat. Caravan leaders shout instructions, drivers argue about water skin placement, and you find yourself ducking under a camel's neck just to avoid being stepped on. It's early morning, the sun's still low, but the caravan prepares meticulously. Water barrels secured, tents folded, medical kits stocked with everything from aloe to optimism. Once they're ready, the caravan stretches like a miniature army. Merchants on horseback, scribes with ledgers, cooks with sacks of grain, guards with spears, and camels walking with the resigned air of creatures who know they're doing all the real labour. The roads are dangerous. Bandits, sandstorms, slippery mountain passes, and occasionally entire political meltdowns that require detours. But caravans move anyway because silk waits for no one. You join a group of merchants from Nishapur heading toward Merv. their saddlebags fat with indigo cloth and their minds already calculating profit margins. They talk constantly. They debate the best rates on pepper, whether a rumour about new pearl markets in Basra is true, and which caravanserai has the best stew. Their conversation is a mix of economic strategy, gossip and weather forecasting, which feels strangely familiar, like the ancient equivalent of office break room chatter. A few days later, the caravan stops at a caravanserai, a fortified inn with walls thick enough to discourage thieves and courtyards wide enough to hold dozens of animals. Inside, the noise is overwhelming. Traders trade, cooks cook, animals complain. A lamplit room buzzes with scribes writing receipts, copying contracts and checking weights. One man starts aggressively bargaining for Persian rugs at an hour of the night when bargaining should be illegal. You watch him argue for 20 minutes before buying a rug he didn't want at a price no one understands. But the land routes are only half the story. To feel the true pulse of Islamic world trade, you head south, toward Basra, then onward to the Arabian Sea where the docks swarm with life. The port of Basra hits you like a tidal wave of sound and smell. Ships crowd the water, their tall masts swaying like forest trunks in the wind. The harbour stinks of fish, salt, wet rope, tar and spices strong enough to crawl into your sinuses and rearrange your thoughts. Sailors shout in Arabic, Persian, Malay, Swahili, and occasionally a dialect you swear is just someone complaining loudly in rhythm. The docks are stacked with goods: pepper from India, cloves from Zanzibar, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, porcelain from China, frankincense from Yemen, ivory tusks, sandalwood logs, sacks of rice, bales of cotton, and bundles of dried limes that will flavour soups from Baghdad to Cairo. Crates slam open, bales shift, barges slide into place with practised ease. Every movement feels choreographed by chaos. You follow a group of sailors preparing for the monsoon season, the wind patterns that make or break Indian Ocean voyages. They explain how the summer winds push ships toward India and Southeast Asia, while winter winds carry them back toward Arabia and East Africa. These winds dictate the rhythms of trade, travel, and even diplomacy. Miss the monsoon window, and you're stuck for months, possibly sharing deck space with people who snore. You board a large dhow, a sailing vessel sleek as an arrow and smelling strongly of coconut fibre rope. The ship's hull is stitched together with cord instead of nails, a feature that astonishes you. The captain tells you proudly that this makes the ship flexible enough to survive rough seas, without cracking like European vessels sometimes do. You nod with newfound respect for rope technology. The crew consists of veteran sailors who've memorised the monsoon cycles the way scholars memorise poetry. They know how to read currents, clouds, stars, and seabird patterns. They speak of storms like old enemies, monsoon winds like temperamental friends, and coral reefs like hungry beasts waiting for careless ships. One man tells you he once survived a typhoon by clinging to a floating crate of pomegranates. He says this with great dignity. When the ship sets sail, the city melts behind you. The dhow glides across the water like a creature at home, its triangular sails catching the wind with elegant precision. Sailors move with half-drunken grace, casual but impossibly skilled. They adjust ropes, secure cargo, chant rhythmic work songs, and occasionally yell at one another for no reason other than maritime tradition. As you drift along the Arabian coast, you pass small islands, fishing villages and lighthouses built from coral stone. Then the ship steers toward Oman, where ports like Sohar and Muscat pulse with maritime entrepreneurship. Omani sailors are legendary navigators, travelling as far as East Africa, India, and even China. You watch shipwrights hammer wooden hulls under palm-thatched roofs. Women walk through the bazaar selling dates, fresh bread, and steaming fish dishes. Everything smells briny and warm, like sunlight wrapped in salt. From here, you follow another vessel toward East Africa. Trade along the Swahili coast flows like a living artery. Ports such as Mogadishu, Kilwa, and Mombasa hum with mixed cultures: Arab, Persian, African, Indian. Coral stone houses line the streets. Markets spill over with gold, ivory, ambergris, mangrove poles, coconuts, and textiles woven from African and Persian designs. You hear Arabic mingling with Bantu languages. You watch craftsmen carve doors so ornate they look like frozen lace. The Indian Ocean world is a dazzling cultural stew, shaped by trade, weather, courage, and chance. From Africa you head northeast, toward India. The city of Calicut bursts onto the horizon like a jewel box tossed into the sea. Pepper is king here, black, spicy, and so valuable merchants talk about it like royalty. Markets overflow with silk saris, gemstones, rice, sugar, and coconuts. Arab merchants maintain permanent settlements here, marrying into local families and forming hybrid communities where traditions blend into something new and vibrant. Further east, in Sri Lanka, cinnamon monopolizes everyone's attention. The smell alone makes you feel awake and mildly spiritual. Arab sailors trade for precious sapphires and strong timbers, then head onward to Southeast Asia, Sumatra, Java, the Malay Peninsula, where cloves, nutmeg, and camphor change hands with whispers of secrecy. These spices are so rare in the West that Europeans will one day cross oceans, burn islands, and nearly break the world trying to control them. Meanwhile, here, merchants negotiate calmly while sipping tea. Not all trade travels by sea. You cross back inland, tracing routes through Persia, where camel caravans head towards Central Asia. The cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh glitter with commerce, linking China to Baghdad. Silk caravans arrive from the east. Traders bring paper, lacquerware, jade, gunpowder ingredients, and tea. In return, they carry textiles, glassware, metal tools, soap, sugar, medicinal herbs, and books. Books travel like prized treasure. Everyone wants manuscripts, copying them, trading them, memorizing them. Along the way, you encounter caravan guards armed with spears and bows. They tell you stories of ambushes, snowstorms in mountain passes, and nights spent sleeping under skies so full of stars it feels like you're inside a jeweled dome. They joke that camels are loyal but stubborn, donkeys are smart but dramatic, and mules are just chaos incarnate. You decide never to underestimate an animal with hooves again. In the north, you traverse the Caspian Sea trade routes. Ships move grain, furs, slaves, wax and honey between steppes, Rus territories, Persia and Anatolia. The air feels colder, the accents rougher, and the goods heavier. But the energy is the same. Movement, exchange, opportunity. Across all these routes, land and sea, the Islamic world doesn't just trade goods. It trades ideas, language, architecture, recipes, music, mathematical methods, agricultural techniques, and medical knowledge. Cultural fusion thrives in every port and caravanserai. A sailor tells you how he learned Persian poetry in Zanzibar. A merchant in Bukhara uses Indian numerals. A spice dealer in Basra cooks rice the Indian way, but seasons it with North African spices. Hybridity is the norm. Borders are suggestions. The state plays its role too. Caliphs fund lighthouses, patrol sea lanes, build caravanserais, repair roads, and negotiate treaties to keep trade flowing. Naval fleets protect shipping routes from pirates. In the Mediterranean, Muslim fleets clash with Byzantine ships in a constant dance of offence, defence, diplomacy, and occasional bragging rights. By sunset, you find yourself back in Basra, sitting at the docks watching ships bob like sleepy beasts. Lamps glow, sailors tie ropes, merchants tally coins, and the sea sighs with the calm of a giant resting after a long day. You realise something steady and profound. Trade is not accessory to this civilization, it is its bloodstream. Routes carry wealth, knowledge, people, languages, beliefs, technologies. Maritime winds propel ideas as much as they do ships. Caravans drag culture behind them like long shadows. The Islamic world spans continents not just because of armies or religion, but because of movement. Determined, coordinated, everyday movement that transforms the world. And as night settles, you follow that movement into the next turning of history's wheel. You leave the ports behind, the ropes creaking, the seabirds screaming, the scent of salt and spice dissolving into memory, and follow a dusty road that leads straight into the living, breathing spine of the Islamic world. The homes, streets, workshops, farms, alleys, courtyards and rooftops where ordinary people spend their days not conquering empires or charting stars but simply living. Here, in the thick hum of daily life, you see how everything you've witnessed — scholarship, law, trade, agriculture, architecture — settles into routines, habits, and small rituals repeated across centuries. Today, you're stepping into kitchens, workshops, prayer halls and marketplaces, brushing shoulders with shepherds, scribes, mothers, craftspeople, imams, nobles, slaves and students. This is the pulse beneath the grand narrative, the slow, steady thrum that makes everything else possible. The first thing that hits you is the smell of bread. Fresh, warm, slightly smoky, carried from a morning bakery where women knead dough rhythmically, pressing palms into soft rounds that puff beautifully inside clay tandoor ovens. Children hover nearby, pretending they don't care about the first hot loaf, though their hopeful eyes say otherwise. A baker hands you a piece, it burns your fingers, but you eat it anyway, because self-control has no place here. You wander through a residential quarter where houses cluster around narrow lanes. Homes rarely face outward. Instead, they open inward toward courtyards filled with shade, water and privacy. Up above, wooden screens shield upper windows, lattice work carved in intricate patterns that let in air but preserve modesty. On rooftops, women hang laundry while chatting across the gap to neighbours. Cats nap everywhere, clearly running some kind of feline shadow government. Inside one courtyard, a family gathers for breakfast. Olives, dates, cheese, yoghurt, herbs, and yesterday's bread toasted over a brazier. A father sips mint tea while fixing a broken sandal. A grandmother tells stories to grandchildren who pretend not to be listening. A servant girl sweeps the tiles, humming softly. Life unfolds with gentle familiarity, the kind that makes you feel like you've stumbled into a place that has been lived in for centuries and will continue long after you're gone. But daily life isn't uniform. Class and status shape everything. You step into the home of a wealthy merchant where silk curtains flutter in a cool breeze and fountains murmur in tiled courtyards. Servants move through halls carrying trays of fruit. The merchant's daughter sits in a sunlit room embroidering gold thread into velvet. His sons study with a private tutor, learning calligraphy, Quranic recitation, mathematics and Persian poetry. The walls gleam with ceramic tiles, the floors with woven carpets, the air with the scent of sandalwood and ambergris. Wealth here means comfort, but also responsibility. The merchant spends half his time managing trade deals, and the other half trying to avoid court politics. A few streets away, you visit a craftsman's house. Modest, busy, overflowing with tools. His workshop occupies the front room, leather scraps on the floor, half-finished sandals on shelves, awls and needles lined neatly. His hands are calloused, his fingers quick. His children help with tasks appropriate to their age, stopping only to raid a jar of figs when he's not looking. The house is simple. Clay walls, woven mats, a couple of wooden chests. But the atmosphere is warm, filled with movement, laughter and the smell of stew simmering in a clay pot. Then there are those with no house at all, labourers who sleep near the city gates, shepherds who roam the outskirts tending flocks, and enslaved people whose lives follow rhythms of work set by others. Some are domestic servants, others farm labourers or porters. Not all experiences are equal, and daily life is shaped by both freedom and constraint. Walking the streets, you notice the diversity. Arabic-speaking tribespeople mix with Persian bureaucrats, Greek merchants, Berber soldiers, Indian sailors, Turkic guards, Jewish physicians, Christian scribes, Nubian porters, and African scholars. The city is a mosaic, not always harmonious, but undeniably rich. You hear conversations in half a dozen languages within a single street. Markets sell Ethiopian coffee beans beside Chinese porcelain, Syrian soap beside Andalusian perfumes. Daily life unfolds inside this fusion, You duck into a busy marketplace, different from the grand urban esuk of earlier. This one is small and neighbourly. A butcher sharpens his knife while chatting with a spice seller. A woman buys herbs and immediately lectures the vendor about last week's wilted cilantro. Two boys argue over the price of a wooden toy camel. A storyteller recites a tale about a clever servant who outwitted a greedy judge. People stop, listen, laugh, shake their heads, and move on. It's theatre, commerce, and community rolled into one. From here, you follow the sound of splashing water into a hammam, the public bathhouse. Inside, steam rises like clouds. Men soak in hot pools, scrub their skin with rough mitts, debate poetry, politics, and whose cousin has the worst singing voice. The hammam is more than hygiene. It's therapy, networking, gossip, spiritual cleansing, and sometimes the only quiet space a person gets all week. Women's hammams, later in the day, are their own vibrant universe. Laughter, beauty rituals, matchmaking conversations, child wrangling, and the sacred exchange of recipes. Nearby, you pass a madrasa, where students gather under archways, reciting aloud from texts they must memorize. Their voices blend into a steady chant. Some debate theology. Others argue about grammar with the intensity of men preparing for war. A few scribble notes, ink smudging their fingers. Study is hard, hungry work. So you notice the vendor outside selling honey pastries to stressed students. Entrepreneurship finds every opportunity. Prayer shapes the rhythm of the day, at dawn, noon, afternoon, evening, and night. The call to prayer washes through the city like a tide of sound. You enter a mosque where rows of worshippers bow in unison, the space filled with murmured recitation. After the prayer, conversations bloom. Men discuss crop prices. Elders share advice. Children chase each other between columns, their laughter echoing like mischievous birds. Religion here is woven into life itself, not separate, but constant. Moving outward, you walk into a rural village where mud brick homes cluster around wells and small orchards. Farmers rise before dawn, tending wheat, barley, date palms, citrus groves, or cotton fields. Women milk goats, spin wool, grind grain, prepare meals and raise children while balancing a workload that would break most modern gym enthusiasts. Shepherds lead flocks across hills, singing to keep rhythm. Dogs bark. Roosters crow, donkeys sigh dramatically. Rural life is noisy, bustling, repetitive, and deeply connected to the seasons. You watch a group of farmers irrigate fields using a canal system, arguing about who gets water first. Their debate is both ancient and immediate. Water, in this world, is life, and its distribution shapes social dynamics as much as any law or treaty. Village evenings are peaceful. Families gather under starry skies, telling stories, drinking tea and savouring cooler air. Children collapse onto mats after long days. Elders recount tales of distant cities none of them will ever see. The night is soft, filled with the hum of crickets and the glow of oil lamps. Then there are the nomadic tribes. You travel with a group of Bedouins crossing desert plains, their tents collapsing and rising with practiced precision. They move with the wind, grazing flocks where they can, navigating by stars and memory. Life here is mobile, communal, rugged, and filled with poetry. Literal poetry, because someone is always reciting verses around the fire. You drink hot tea in a goat hair tent while listening to stories older than the cities you visited. Their worldview is shaped by open horizons, kinship networks, and the steady companionship of animals. In the northern mountains, Turkic communities graze horses and sheep. Their tents smell of horsehair and smoked meat. Riders demonstrate archery while galloping, hitting targets with terrifying accuracy. Children learn to ride before they can spell their names. Women oversee herds, cook meals, and manage trade negotiations with neighbouring tribes. Tribal life is structured, proud, and agile, a contrast to city living, but equally rich. Slavery is part of this world, uncomfortable and unavoidable. Slaves perform household tasks, agricultural labour, military service, or specialised crafts. Some earn freedom over time, others are absorbed into families, but many remain bound by systems they never chose. Daily life includes inequalities that cut deep, and though the legal system tries to regulate treatment, reality varies. You witness brutality in some households and surprising tenderness in others, but the imbalance of power is unmistakable. Daily life is also shaped by gender roles, not rigid everywhere, but broadly structured. Men often dominate public spaces, markets, mosques, workshops. Women wield influence within the home, in trade of textiles and perfumes, in midwifery, in education of children, and sometimes as poets, scholars, or business owners. You meet a woman in Cordoba who runs a book copying workshop, employing both men and women. You meet others who negotiate property rights, draft contracts, and manage estates, yet many remain confined by custom. It's a world of variation, not a single narrative. Food ties everything together. You taste dishes across regions, lamb stews with apricots, spiced rice with chickpeas, bread dipped in olive oil, sweet pastries dripping with honey, almond puddings, pomegranate salads, eggplant roasted until smoky and soft. Meals are communal, slow, shared, moments of connection. As dusk settles on another long day, you step onto a rooftop overlooking the city. Lamps flicker alive, families gather for dinner, merchants close shops, children chase each other in fading light. A mother calls her son home with a voice that brooks no refusal. A storyteller finishes a tale, a craftsman packs away his tools, a scholar extinguishes his lamp, and you feel the pulse, not dramatic or grand, but steady, warm, human. Daily life is the quiet architecture of civilization, the habits, hopes, routines, and relationships that hold everything else together. And with nightfall humming across rooftops and alleyways, you're carried onward into the shifting dynasties that will soon reshape everything once more. You wake the next morning to a different kind of tension, subtle, taut, like the city itself is holding its breath. Trade is flowing, scholars are debating, farmers are irrigating, artists are carving, children are shouting in alleyways, but something heavier underlies it all. Politics shifting, dynasties rising and falling, regions asserting independence, and new powers claiming authority. Today, you're walking straight into the swirl of political fragmentation and renewal. The centuries in which the Islamic world becomes less a single empire and more a constellation of rulers, courts, armies, and cultures stretching from Al-Andalus to Persia. You're about to watch dynasties come and go with the speed and drama of a long-running historical soap opera, except with more turbans and better architecture. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the shining star of Baghdad, begins to wobble under the weight of its size. You feel it in the city, soldiers bargaining for overdue pay, scribes muttering about tax records from rebellious provinces, governors issuing polite letters that sound suspiciously like threats. When you step into the audience chamber of a provincial administrator, he smiles too broadly and assures you everything is very stable. Behind him, maps tell a different story. Territories shading themselves in new colours, loyalties shifting, borders breathing like living creatures. Your journey begins west, in Al-Andalus, where the Umayyads, long overthrown in the east, resurrect their dynasty with audacity. In Cordoba, the court of the Umayyad emir and later caliph dazzles with libraries, gardens, musicians, and political ambition polished to a dangerous shine. You step into the hall of columns, where the ruler holds court beneath arches glowing with oil lamp light. Diplomats from Christian kingdoms in the north bow stiffly. Jewish scholars present translations. Muslim poets recite odes praising both Andalusian rain and their patron's generosity. Everything is cultured, glittering, precarious. But even here, fragmentation lurks. Local governors in Toledo grumble about taxes. Berber leaders in the south demand more autonomy. When the caliph dies, succession becomes a question no one wants to answer, but everyone wants to influence. You overhear two servants whispering about rival claimants, one scholar predicting a period of great poetry and terrible meetings, and one guard muttering that the only certain winner in this political moment is the wine cellar outside the palace. Crossing the Mediterranean, you head east again, into North Africa, where the Fatimids rise in Afriqiya, modern Tunisia, like a slow-burning fuse. Their claim descends from the Prophet's daughter Fatima, and they wield this lineage with charisma and strategy. You watch their early courts filled with merchants, scholars, and tribal leaders pledging support. Their banners flutter with fresh confidence. Their army drills in open plains, dust rising like golden haze. When they march east, you follow. Their conquest of Egypt is swift, decisive, and remarkably organised. You arrive in Fustat just as they begin establishing their new capital, Cairo, Al-Qahira, the victorious. Construction crews swarm over foundations. Architects sketch domes and palaces. The great Mosque of Al-Azhar rises, destined to become a world-renowned centre of scholarship. The city hums with possibility. A Fatimid commander explains that ruling Egypt requires a balance of diplomacy, irrigation management, and pretending not to hear tax complaints. You believe him. Yet even as the Fatimids thrive, the Abbasids endure. Baghdad remains a symbol, a moral, intellectual, spiritual anchor, even when its direct control wanes. You return there briefly and see caliphs still presiding over ceremonies, still issuing decrees, still nodding wisely as courtiers flatter them with the enthusiasm of men who want job promotions. But the real power often belongs to military strongmen, provincial commanders, or ambitious viziers who advise the caliph while quietly shaping policy like potters shaping clay. Heading east once more, you step into Persia, a realm where new dynasties rise like sturdy shoots after a rainstorm. The Samanids flourish first, ruling from Bukhara with refinement and strong Persian cultural revival. Their court is a treasure chest of poetry, philosophy, and silk-bound books. You watch a poet recite verses from Rudaki, his voice steady, his gestures elegant. The court applauds with measured grace, as though poetry were both entertainment and subtle political currency. Samanid governors juggle trade routes, agricultural wealth, and Turkic military slaves trained into elite troops. But even their rule fractures as Turkic generals gain influence. You witness secret negotiations behind tent flaps, alliances forming, loyalties shifting, quiet promises sealing the rise of the next dynasty, the Ghaznavids. You travel with the Ghaznavid armies as they march from Afghanistan into Persia and the Indian subcontinent. Their cavalry moves with terrifying precision. Horses thunder across plains, banners snap in cold mountain winds. Mahmud of Ghazni, ambitious and relentless, sponsors scholars and poets even as he expands his empire. You sit in his court listening to al-Biruni discuss astronomy, while court officials whisper about the next military expedition. The combination of intellectual brilliance and aggressive expansion feels like sitting through a lecture, while someone sharpens swords behind you. But no dynasty holds the stage forever. To the north, in the steppes, Turkic confederations stir. Their arrival into Persian and Mesopotamian politics is slow at first. Bands of warriors hired as mercenaries, then promoted to generals, then elevated to sultans. And soon the Seljuks stride onto the historical stage like they've been waiting for centuries. You feel their rise like a gust of cold wind. In Nishapur you watch them enter the city gates triumphantly. Their banners ripple. Their military discipline is sharp, their archery terrifying, their sense of destiny unmistakable. They adopt Sunni orthodoxy with zeal and position themselves as protectors of the Abbasid Caliphate, which is convenient because it's also the best way to legitimize their own rule. You walk into Baghdad under Seljuk guardianship. The Caliph welcomes them publicly, while quietly calculating how to keep influence. The Seljuk Sultan sits beside him, armoured, stern, speaking softly but carrying the political equivalent of a very large stick. Court politics shift. The Seljuks appoint viziers, reorganise administration, and discipline rebellious provinces with efficiency that makes provincial governors break out in unexpected travel plans. Under Seljuk influence, new institutions emerge. Madrasas flourish, especially the famous Nizamiya schools founded by the brilliant vizier Nizam al-Mulk, who runs the empire with the exhausted energy of a man juggling flaming scimitars. He writes the Siyasat-nama, advising rulers on justice, governance, and how not to be assassinated. Advice tragically prescient considering what happens to him later. But fragmentation never stops. In the west, Andalusia fractures into dozens of Taifa kingdoms after the fall of Cordoba's caliphate. You wander through small courts where ambitious princes hire poets, build palaces, negotiate alliances, and, unfortunately, consult astronomers on whether today is a good day to attack their neighbours. Some courts glitter with brilliance, others simmer with envy. Soldiers march, treaties shift, and a Taifa king dramatically storms out of negotiations because someone insulted his falconry skills. In Egypt, the Fatimids eventually weaken under internal conflict. Viziers become kingmakers. Generals seize power. You see palace intrigue unfold like an endless chess match, except sometimes the pieces argue back. In Persia, the Seljuk Empire splinters after strong leaders die. Regional rulers assert autonomy. Cities like Isfahan, Ray, and Herat glow with cultural energy but wobble politically. You sit in a caravanserai as travellers gossip about new claimants, rebellions, and grand viziers who sleep with daggers under their pillows. And on the horizons of Central Asia, you feel something else stirring, something vast, growing, still distant, but inevitable. Mongol tribes consolidate under leaders whose names you haven't heard yet but will never forget. The winds of the steppe carry whispers. Throughout all of this, daily life continues, but under constantly shifting skies. In one city, a new dynasty brings infrastructure, justice, and learning. In another, heavy taxes and troop demands make people grumble. Scholars adapt. Merchants adjust routes. Farmers pray for stability. Architects wait for new patrons with grand visions. Everyone learns to live with uncertainty. Dynasties shape not just borders, but culture. Under the Andalusian Umayyads, music and philosophy flourish. Under the Fatimids, art, astronomy, and Shi'i scholarship blossom. Under the Samanids, Persian literature revives with stunning vitality. Under the Seljuks, Sunni institutions and Persianate court culture grow together into a powerful new identity. You watch as each region becomes more itself, distinct yet connected. The Islamic world is no longer a single political entity. It is a civilization of many centres, many accents, many dynasties, each weaving its own strand into the vast tapestry. As night falls, you sit on a hill above Isfahan, its domes glowing silver in moonlight. Behind you lie centuries of shifting thrones. Ahead lie new storms and new horizons. But in this moment, you feel the great pulse of history. Change, continuity, collapse, renewal, moving through the lands like a restless tide. And you rise again, ready to follow that tide into the next inevitable collision between cultures, armies, and ideas. You feel the atmosphere tighten as you descend from the quiet hill above Isfahan. Daily life hums on, but beneath it lies a different current, deeper, quicker, charged with the kind of tension that comes from men in armour glancing at maps, scribes drafting letters laced with hidden meanings, and border outposts sending messengers who ride as if chased by the wind. The shifting dynasties you just walked through did not exist in a vacuum. They lived in a world of rivals, neighbours, alliances, and enemies. Today, you step straight into the machinery of cross-cultural diplomacy and warfare. The very real, very gritty exchanges that shaped frontiers, forged treaties, sparked battles, and determined who controlled what, when, and for how long. You begin in the east, where the Islamic world meets the sprawling plains of India. The frontiers here are not sharp lines, but wide, messy zones where cultures overlap like watercolour bleeding on paper. You arrive at a frontier fort governed by a Ghaznavid commander. Soldiers in leather cuirasses drill in the courtyard, their horses pouring dust into the air. Messengers arrive constantly, from local rajas, rival generals, mountain tribes, and far-off envoys demanding tribute or promising peace. One courier dismounts, hands over a letter sealed with bright red wax, and mutters, He says he wants a treaty, but he brought twice the cavalry this time. Diplomacy in this region always includes the unspoken and what if they don't agree. You attend a council meeting where military officers calculate supply lines, water access, siege equipment, and the positions of neighbouring armies. Maps unfurl across tables, calibrated not by borders but by terrain, rivers, hills, forests, passes. Negotiations with Indian rulers are pragmatic, gifts exchanged, hostages traded, boundaries redrawn so frequently that cartographers joke they should switch to chalk. Cultural exchange happens fluidly here. Persian administrators learn Sanskrit loanwords, Indian mathematicians teach new methods to Ghaznavid scholars, and caravans carry spices, cloth, horses, and ideas back and forth whether diplomats like it or not. Yet diplomacy often dissolves into warfare. You travel with a Ghaznavid expedition moving south. The army feels like a mobile city. Infantry, cavalry, archers, engineers, cooks, water carriers, farriers and priests. Siege machines clatter on wagons. Horses snort impatiently. Scouts vanish into the trees. When the battle begins, it is brutal and fast. Arrows darken the sky. War elephants thunder forward with terrifying majesty, and cavalry wheel in tight, precise formations. You cling to the edge of the field, heart pounding, realizing that everything you've observed, scholarship, architecture, agriculture, beats here too in the clash of steel and will. You retreat gratefully toward the west, where the frontier softens into long diplomatic corridors running between Baghdad, Cairo, Constantinople, and local rulers stretching across Anatolia and the Levant. You arrive in Aleppo just as an envoy from the Byzantine Empire enters the city. The procession is theatrical. Silk banners, polished armour, richly robed advisors, and one extremely bored-looking translator who probably deserves a raise. Crowds gather to stare. Merchants mutter guesses about the envoy's message. Children point at the shiny helmets. Inside the citadel, the diplomatic dance begins. Gifts are exchanged first. Bolts of silk, carved ivory boxes, perfumes, gold coins, exotic fruits. The host offers dates stuffed with almonds. The Byzantines counter with candied walnuts. These gifts are messages wrapped in sweetness. We are wealthy, we are stable, we expect respect. Then come the negotiations. Officials sit in long hallways speaking through interpreters, weighing the political climate like jewelers testing gems. They discuss prisoner exchanges, coastal raids, border passes, and tribute shipments. They negotiate safe passage for merchants and define seasonal truces. Each word is sharp as a blade, each compliment lined with strategy. You watch scribes draft treaty clauses in Arabic, Greek, and occasionally Armenian for good measure. The presence of Armenian merchants and intermediaries reveals a truth diplomats rarely say aloud. Borderlands are not barriers, but bridges. Armenians, Kurds, Georgians, Syriac Christians, Bedouin tribes, all act as connectors, carrying messages, goods, and news across shifting lines. Moving south, you enter Egypt under Fatimid rule, where diplomacy takes on theatrical flair. The Fatimid court in Cairo dazzles visiting ambassadors with luminous palaces, scented fountains, and processions choreographed like state ballet. A delegation from Nubia arrives, bearing ivory tusks, gold, and ostrich feathers. Fatimid officials meet them with silks, fine metalwork, and promises of military aid should certain upstream river neighbours become unpleasant. Diplomacy here blends economic necessity with ceremonial magnificence. The Nile binds Egypt and Nubia together, even when politics attempt to pull them apart. But when diplomacy fails, military campaigns roll across the desert. You travel with a Fatimid force heading west to counter tribal revolts. The army marches with drums beating steady rhythms. Command tents rise nightly like patterned mushrooms. Scouts slip into the dark, returning with intelligence about water sources and tribal alliances. Conflict here is not grand siege warfare, but quick, mobile engagements. Arrows released in bursts, cavalry sweeping across dunes, negotiations happening mid-campaign as tribal leaders switch sides depending on the wind. Turning north again, You find yourself in Anatolia during the early Seljuk expansion. The frontiers between the Islamic world and Byzantium shift like sand dunes, each season rewriting reality. The Seljuks fight with precision, mounted archers, hit-and-run tactics, iron discipline. You march with a Seljuk unit through mountain passes where the air is thin and cold. They move like ghosts, firing arrows at full gallop, then vanishing into hills before the Byzantines can respond. At night, around campfires, you hear soldiers tell stories of battles where strategy mattered more than brute strength. They laugh about how Byzantine generals underestimate steppe archers. They debate troop replacements, tribe alliances, and food shortages. They complain about boots. Soldiers always complain about boots. When the Seljuks win the Battle of Manzikert, you stand on a ridge watching Byzantine formations crumble under waves of cavalry. It's chaotic, loud, terrifying, and it reshapes Anatolia's future. Turkmen tribes stream in afterward, settling the land, transforming language, culture, and architecture. Warfare and migration intertwine here, creating the foundations for future sultanates and eventually the Ottoman Empire. But political conflict isn't only external. Inside the Islamic world, rival dynasties wage their own diplomatic and military contests. You travel to a meeting between a Seljuk vizier and an Abbasid envoy. Their conversation is polite, cordial, and edged like polished steel. They negotiate military support, tax distribution, troop rights, and political symbolism. Each man smiles as if hosting a pleasant tea party. Each man leaves wondering if the other just gained the upper hand. Shifting again, you cross into the Maghreb, where Berber dynasties rise with fierce determination. The Almoravids unify swathes of North Africa, then sweep into Al-Andalus at the invitation of desperate Taifa rulers facing Christian advances. You witness tense debates in Seville about whether to call on North African help. Some nobles argue it's necessary, others fear losing autonomy. The decision is made only after an impassioned argument about pride, survival, and, surprisingly, who makes the better couscous. Politics, it turns out, is also cuisine. Crossing the Strait of Gibraltar with the Almoravid army, you watch disciplined ranks move through Andalusian cities. Their presence stabilizes some courts and alarms others. Eventually, a new dynasty, the Almohads, rises to challenge them, sweeping across North Africa with religious fervour, political ambition, and military precision. You slip into a council tent where Almohad commanders discuss river crossings, fortress sieges, and how to incorporate conquered tribes into their growing state. Every region has its own pulse, its own strategy, its own flavour of conflict. Diplomacy also flows north, toward Christian Europe. You attend a meeting in Toledo between Muslim envoys and Christian kings. The room bristles with tension. Translators switch rapidly between Arabic, Castilian, and Latin. They negotiate prisoner exchanges, border markets, tribute arrangements, and occasionally align against mutual threats. On both sides, rulers maintain public hostility, while exchanging private letters dripping with strategic courtesy. Realpolitik, it turns out, speaks all languages. In Sicily, you witness a melting pot of diplomacy, warfare, and cultural exchange as Muslim, Byzantine, and Norman powers collide. Sicilian Muslims negotiate autonomy under new Christian rulers, offering agricultural expertise in exchange for stability. You visit a Norman court where Arab-speaking administrators manage tax registers, and Greek architects design chapels. Warfare creates chaos. Diplomacy rebuilds the pieces. Through it all, espionage flows like a subterranean river. Spies slip between courts disguised as merchants, scholars, musicians, or pilgrims. You meet one in Antioch, a cheerful man who claims to sell dates but owns 3 daggers and a disturbingly detailed map of fortifications. He tells you, information is the sharpest sword. You believe him immediately, and still, violence looms. Crusader armies arrive from the west, driven by religious zeal and political ambition. Their arrival jolts the balance of the Levant. You watch cities brace for siege, walls reinforced, granaries stocked, alliances forged. Local Muslim dynasties, often rivals, suddenly negotiate unity, or, at the very least, temporary cooperation. You attend a tense meeting between the rulers of Damascus and Aleppo who exchange polite greetings while their advisors whisper strategies behind curtains. But the Muslim response to the Crusades is slow at first, fractured, cautious. Only later do figures like Nur ad-Din and Saladin attempt to unify the region. You witness one of Saladin's councils, warriors, scholars, tribal leaders, administrators gathered around a war table. They discuss troop numbers, supply lines, fortresses, diplomacy with Byzantines, truces with Crusader states, and the moral framing of their campaigns. Someone brings coffee, everyone looks grateful. War councils are exhausting. You visit battlefields too. The clang of steel at Hattin, the dust clouds rising from cavalry charges, the grim determination of infantry holding the line. You witness Saladin's chivalry, offering water to defeated enemies, arranging ransom rather than slaughter. Gestures that ripple through both Islamic and European chronicles. Yet warfare is never just noble. You see suffering, burned fields, displaced families, broken walls. Diplomacy becomes the light that breaks through the smoke, fragile, necessary. And always, commerce continues. Even at war, merchants negotiate safe passage. Diplomats use trade treaties as leverage. A caravan might pass under guard through territory where armies fought only months earlier. Conflict disrupts, but exchange persists like a stubborn heartbeat. By the time you reach the eastern edges again, near the Oxus River, you sense a new storm rising. Envoys in silk robes worry over reports of a charismatic Mongol leader uniting tribes with terrifying efficiency. Caravanserai gossip burns with rumours. They ride like the wind. They don't fear death. Their horses can run for days. You watch diplomats scramble to assess whether this new force can be appeased, deterred, or ignored. History will answer that soon. For now, you sit beside a riverbank, watching soldiers sharpen spears while envoys discuss treaties, merchants load camels, and scouts vanish into twilight. The Islamic world, stretched across continents, negotiates its survival daily, through letters, battles, gestures, promises, threats, treaties, and the exhausting work of coexistence. Frontiers are not walls, they are conversations, sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered, sometimes written in ink, sometimes in blood. And as the stars rise, you prepare to follow the ideas that travel across these borders into the heart of medieval Europe. You stand at the edge of a long, winding road that stretches westward, out of the bustling Islamic world and toward lands where church bells ring instead of muezzins calling, where parchment is still precious, where kings sign charters with trembling quills, and where scholars argue in cold stone halls heated only by prayer and stubbornness. This is the frontier where ideas cross borders long before armies do, where the intellectual energy of the Islamic world becomes the spark that ignites Europe's slow awakening. Today, you follow the conduits of intellectual diffusion, the channels through which astronomy, medicine, philosophy, mathematics, architecture, and literature slip quietly into medieval Europe, reshaping its foundations one manuscript, one teacher, one translated sentence at a time. You begin in a place that feels like a hinge between worlds, Al-Andalus. When you step into Cordoba, the city hums with scholarly brightness, libraries stacked with manuscripts, scholars debating in shimmering courtyards, poets reciting under orange trees heavy with fruit. Here, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish thinkers interact not as isolated worlds, but as overlapping circles on a Venn diagram drawn in fragrant ink. The libraries alone are staggering. Catalogues listing hundreds of thousands of volumes on medicine, geometry, botany, law, astronomy, music theory, and metaphysics. You watch scribes copy Ibn Sina beside Galen, Ptolemy beside Al-Farabi, Aristotle beside commentaries from Damascus and Bukhara. One afternoon, you join a study circle in a quiet courtyard. A Muslim scholar explains geometric proofs from Euclid, while a Jewish student takes notes, planning to share the ideas with a Christian teacher in Toledo. The conversation flows through languages like water through connected vessels, Arabic to Hebrew to Latin, with gestures, drawings, and the occasional raised eyebrow when someone mispronounces a technical term. You realize you're witnessing the intellectual inheritance of the ancient world, passing through the Islamic world and preparing to flow into Europe like a wide, deep river. When Cordoba's political unity fractures, scholars migrate north and east, carrying texts with them. You travel to Toledo, a city reclaimed by Christian rule but still layered with Muslim and Jewish intellect. Its narrow alleys twist between towers and churches, where translators gather in what resembles the world's earliest co-working space. You enter a room lit by high windows and cluttered with manuscripts. A Muslim scholar reads an Arabic text aloud. A Jewish scholar translates it into Castilian. A Christian cleric rewrites it into Latin. The table groans under the weight of scrolls. Ink pots, knives for scraping parchment mistakes, and snacks that appear to be raisins stuck to bread. Here, works from across the Islamic world become gateways for Europe. Mathematical treatises by Al-Khwarizmi, whose book will give the world the word algorithm, travel through Latin corridors. His algebra transforms European computation. You watch a translator clench his fist triumphantly after finally cracking a difficult equation. He shouts, "It works!" then immediately smudges his manuscript with excitement. Astronomical texts, Albertani's star tables, Altusi's planetary models, and commentaries on Ptolemy are copied into manuscripts that will one day sit in the hands of Copernicus's teachers. Medical works by Al-Razi and Ibn Sina enter European universities, where students pore over descriptions of fevers, anatomy, pharmacology, and surgery. You sit in a medieval classroom in Salerno as a European instructor cites Ibn Sina's canon of medicine with reverence, tapping the manuscript so hard you fear for its longevity. The students, wrapped in wool cloaks, take notes with the grim commitment of people preparing for high-stakes exams centuries before caffeine was invented. Meanwhile, philosophical texts flow along the same channels. Aristotle returns to Europe wearing an Arabic accent, accompanied by commentaries from Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Ibn Sina, Avicenna. You sit in a Paris lecture hall where a professor raises Ibn Rushd's commentary like a holy relic. Students argue heatedly about metaphysics, occasionally shouting Averroista at each other as both insult and compliment. Scholastics adopt, reject, reinterpret, and duel with these ideas until European philosophy reshapes itself. You move next to Sicily, an island that glimmers like a mirror reflecting many worlds at once. Under Norman rule, Sicily becomes a multilingual laboratory of cultural borrowing. Arab architects design palaces for Christian kings. Greek mosaicists decorate Muslim-influenced chapels. Latin scribes study Arabic star charts. You wander through the Palazzo dei Normanni, where Muqarna's ceilings drip golden honeycomb patterns over Roman arches and Byzantine mosaics. It's a visual sentence in 3 languages fused into one architectural poem. Scholars gather in Palermo to translate mathematical and astronomical works. The royal court invites Muslim physicians, highly trained, deeply experienced, to diagnose ailments no European doctor dares name. You meet one such physician treating a Norman noble. He calmly explains diet, sleep cycles, and herbal remedies, while the patient's uncle swears the illness is caused by evil vapours from the moon. The physician smiles politely and prescribes pomegranate syrup. Trade routes amplify this intellectual flow. Along the Mediterranean coast, Genoese and Venetian merchants carry not only spices and textiles, but manuscripts, instruments, and whispers of knowledge. You board a Venetian ship leaving Alexandria, its hold loaded with pepper, ink, sugar, and a small wooden box containing Arabic astrolabes destined for Europe. The sailors stash them carefully, not because they value astronomy, but because they plan to sell the instruments for impressive profit margins. When you arrive in Venice, the astrolabes vanish into aristocratic hands, where wealthy young men will use them to impress dinner guests by finding the time using stars they cannot name. Crossing the Alps into France, you enter the University of Montpellier, where medical students crouch around a lecturer reading Al-Razi's works on measles and smallpox. You watch them sketch diagrams copied originally from Persian manuscripts. In one corner of the classroom, a student whispers, "These ideas feel like magic." Another whispers back, "No, they feel like clarity." You travel next to Paris. The Sorbonne is still young, cold, noisy, and brimming with debate. Here, Ibn Rushd becomes the philosophical lightning rod of the century. Students cram into lecture halls, some eager, some confused, some wishing they'd gone into pottery instead, to hear Aristotle interpreted through Islamic lenses. The clash between theology and reason intensifies. One professor waves a manuscript in the air demanding reconciliation. Another insists Averroes pushes reason too far. A third mutters that they should all take a nap and revisit the question in spring. Across northern Europe, mechanical innovations from the Islamic world, water clocks, windmill designs, irrigation techniques, begin appearing silently. You watch a millwright in France examine a translated Arabic diagram of a horizontal windmill. He scratches his head, nods, then immediately insists the idea was his all along. Even culinary diffusion takes hold. Sugar, rice, citrus fruits, and silk influence medieval European taste and trade. A Sicilian baker shares a recipe for almond pastries based on techniques learned from Muslim cooks. You try a sample. It melts on your tongue. Your knees go weak, and you realise half of European dessert culture has just been born. You head farther northwest, to Oxford. Here, a small group of scholars pause over newly translated works. Astronomy, optics, and mathematics transform classroom discussions. The study of natural philosophy begins to shift from metaphysical speculation to structured inquiry. You visit a workshop where an early thinker experiments with lenses based on Ibn al-Haytham's theories of light and vision. He places a glass sphere on a table, shines a candle beside it, and gasps quietly as the light bends exactly as described. "This," he whispers, "changes everything." But intellectual diffusion is not a one-way street. You follow the reverse flow as European envoys, monks and scholars travel into the Islamic world. Some go to study medicine in Damascus, some to learn philosophy in Cordoba, some to purchase manuscripts in Cairo, some simply to observe. They carry home stories of cities lit by lamps, hospitals organised by wards, libraries open late into the night, astronomers measuring planetary motion with precision instruments. In Europe, these tales sound like fantasy. Cities where water runs in channels through courtyards, hospitals where doctors keep patient charts, libraries where books are lent freely. Unthinkable. Yet slowly, imperceptibly, the ideas take root. In cathedrals across Europe, architects experiment with pointed arches, a structural innovation long used in Islamic architecture. You stand in Notre Dame as a mason sketches an arch that shifts weight gracefully downward, enabling taller walls and wider windows. He doesn't know the design's precise origins, but the lines on his parchment reflect centuries of borrowing and blending. Everywhere you walk, you see the ripples, European numerals replacing Roman ones, medical schools adapting Islamic diagnostics, philosophers debating the soul using Ibn Sina's frameworks, astronomers building observatories inspired by Islamic predecessors, sailors using improved navigation tools based on Arabic designs, poets quoting Andalusian verse. The diffusion is quiet, gradual, transformative, and at last, you step onto a grassy hill overlooking a European town at dusk. Church bells ring. Smoke rises from chimneys. Students argue under a budding university's archway. Merchants unload goods from distant ports. A physician mixes herbs learned from Arabic texts. A monk copies an astronomical diagram into his notebook. A mason sharpens his tools for a new arch design. A baker experiments with sugar. The sun sinks, and with it comes the soft realization that nothing in history moves alone. Ideas flow like rivers, sometimes loud and crashing, sometimes gentle and meandering, reshaping lands far beyond their source. Ideas invented in Basra travel to Paris. Concepts debated in Damascus shape Oxford. Techniques perfected in Cairo reach Venice. Poems written in Cordoba echo in Provence. Every manuscript copied in Toledo becomes a seed planted in soil ready for growth. And now, with twilight dimming the horizon, you stand at the final threshold of this 1,000-year journey, ready to slow your steps and drift into the soft wind down that follows. The world quiets around you now, softening like a lantern dimmed at the end of a long evening. The roads you've walked, dusty caravan paths, marble courtyards, tiled mosques, crowded markets, silent libraries, fold themselves gently into memory, settling like pages closed one by one. The noise of scholars debating under moonlit arches fades to a low, comforting murmur. The clang of caravan bells slips into a distant echo. Even the bustling ports, loud with sailors' chants and creaking planks, fall into a kind of rhythmic calm. You breathe, slowly, as the vast sweep of the past settles around you like a woven cloak. Cities dim their lights, Baghdad's golden domes, Cairo's minarets, Cordoba's arches, Samarkand's turquoise tiles, each glowing softly before easing into shadow. The people you've met, merchants and scholars, farmers and architects, sailors and poets, drift to their own rest, their stories pausing, their hands still at last. The night air cools, the smell of dust and jasmine mingles. Somewhere a river glides quietly under starlight, carrying ancient reflections downstream. You feel your thoughts lengthen, slow, soften, as if stretching into the gentle cadence of a lullaby written by centuries of history. All the movement, trade winds, shifting dynasties, wandering caravans, settles now into stillness. What remains is a calm, steady pulse, a whisper of connection, a reminder that every culture, every person, every century touched and shaped another. Let the imagery fade like the last glow of sunset. Let the noise drift away. Let your breath fall into an easy rhythm. The journey has carried you across 1,000 years. Now let the last echo settle and rest.